this point, we'll call to order the special committee of the whole meeting dated Monday, March 15th at 2021 at 5 p.m. And can you get the call to order, please? Roll call.
Bynum,
Here.
trustee Selup,
Here.
trustee Wood,
Here.
trustee Mahoney,
Here.
trustee Andreessen,
Here.
trustee Coonsey,
I am here.
and President Miller.
Here. We have public comment on agenda items only. I don't see anybody from the general public out there, but if there is, somebody wants to say something. Seeing none, we will move on to our one and only agenda item, which is the 2022 budget workshop, and I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Leo. So I made a decision to follow this memo format. We had a PowerPoint, but I scrapped it at the last minute because I didn't want you to have too many things on your screen at one time. I think it's very hard to watch a PowerPoint, look at a memo, and look at people. So I'm going to use the memo essentially as a guide for our discussion and follow it topic by topic. There'll be moments in which I share my screen, but I'll try to make them brief. And they're really the important moments, the moments where we talk about some of the key initiatives that are budgeted or either deferred. And so I'll try to reserve those moments, but does everybody have access to the memo? If you don't, I can also share that on my screen.
Well,
not
you're
have
just talking about the PDF that you sent, the fiscal year 2022 budget workshop agenda.
Yes, that's correct.
Got it.
There's the agenda and then there's the workshop. Oh, I see.
The agenda item.
Workshop agenda, sorry, yes.
Workshop agenda. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that will be our guide. So I'm going to try to be brief as possible, but just feel free to interrupt me. Staff's going to jump in and talk at the times when something's related to their department, but I want this to be more of a conversation, not just a presentation by me, but I will keep it as brief as possible. So I start out with the strategic planning goals. And you guys know what these goals are because you participated them. But especially for our trustees, our new incoming trustees, I see Trisha on here. I don't know if I see Sarah. I wanted to remind you, okay, great. I wanted to remind them that we use the strategic plan as part of our budget development. So throughout the document, you're going to find examples where I've tried to identify what strategic planning goal we're working towards with either policy decisions or the allocation of resources. Brandis texted me, she said she was having some technical issues. Brandis, are you on? Okay, that's fine. She's not on. So this has a lot of good news in it. And I don't know if everyone had a chance to go through the whole memo, but the best part of it is the fiscal 2021 year-end projection. I made Brandis check this several times. I was feeling way too good about it. And I have a lot of explanation here, but I'll hit the highlights. So when I came to the board with the COVID budget last year, after we had to scrap the budget that was presented at the budget workshop, we requested to use about $1.5 million in reserves in anticipation of revenue losses. And as you remember, we deferred and we cut a lot of items out of the budget in order to get to that point. So with these reduced expenditures, but without significant revenue losses, we're coming at a $2.3 million surplus. So the village is in a very strong financial position, much better than I thought we would. And it's related to several items, but tightening our belts was definitely one of the things that assisted in us. So talking about sales tax. So everyone's been asking, what is the ramifications of sales tax? So I've broken this down to 2 different time periods to try to help explain it to you. And that is on page 2 in the chart with the blue title. So you can see from March to June, we did see a sales tax loss, but when things were shut down completely, and that was about $176,000. But from the period after that, within this 12-month period that I'm looking at, we actually saw a revenue increase of $70,000. So part of the reason I think that is we have a lot of outdoor dining options. We also, had a lot of carryout options. The Kane County wasn't enforcing some of the shutdown orders, and also vehicles were still being purchased. The only significant business that was impacted was like Santa's Village. So we did lose our amusement taxes. We did lose some sales tax from there. But our sales taxes were very strong. We've also taken on new businesses recently. So if some businesses were struggling, it was made up by other businesses. So our sales tax number at the end of the day was only $100,000 less. Could it have been even more? Sure. But we know at least that it was about 100,000 less. So that's a significant impact to the budget, because we were obviously budgeting to receive far less sales tax than we would otherwise. Utility taxes also came in about $350,000 more than budget. This is basically just to increase usage, and it's clear at the end of the day that people were able to pay their bills for the most part. We also have Rocky Road, which produces electricity, uses gas, but produces electricity in the village. And a few years ago, the village implemented a gas tax on them. And so if they're producing a lot of electricity and they're using a lot of gas, we're seeing a lot of revenue there. So they had strong numbers as well. So we had a lot more utility taxes than we anticipated. We kind of took a conservative approach, thinking people will not be able to pay their bills. They'll be turning, the heat way down and all these things. But really, as they're working from home, their usages were high. So that was very good for us. Building permits is a huge highlight for the budget, and it appears here and in the water and sewer fund that I'll get into in a minute. All of our large commercial projects and more proceeded. We kind of had to assume that this wasn't going to happen. But we got building permits, impact fee, water and sewer, and meter revenue. So in the general fund, we got about $500,000 more from our projects moving forward, which is great news. And then obviously we received about just under $200,000 in COVID relief funding. So that was the revenue change in the general fund that we didn't expect. Now, expenditure-wise, there's a few expenditures we didn't make. So even though we had strong sales taxes, we didn't have to pay out Dundee Ford for the development agreement they have, because they didn't meet their threshold that they have within the agreement. We also didn't have to pay out Speedway because they're not operating. So that was about $90,000 we had budgeted that we didn't have to spend. Police overtime was obviously way low due to police activity. Many things were shut down, and we didn't have our regular bar scene that we had, and we also didn't have our events. Throughout this time period in both the general fund and the water fund, we also put in very strict spending controls. It was basically don't buy anything. And the department heads will tell you that. And so they asked for everything. Anything that wasn't needed was in any form discretionary. They asked permission, and that's how we kept the expenditures low. So at the end of the day, our deficit in the general fund went from a $1.6 million budget deficit to a $1.4 million surplus. So that's a $3 million swing. So that's very significant for the village, obviously. To have made it through this pandemic without using reserves is something I hope most municipalities have been able to do, but I'm not sure. But we still deserve some credit and for being so proactive and getting this done. In the water and sewer side, similar, but to a lesser extent. We saw revenues were pretty stable. We didn't collect any penalties at this time, but the usage was not far off other usage because people were in the home. So we saw good usage. Again, we saw very strong water and sewer connection fees and meter fees from our commercial projects that we did not budget. Again, we had very strict spending controls with the water and sewer fund, just like we do with general operations, and we saw good utility rates, which helped some of the regular expenditures. We use a lot of electricity and gas to run our operations at the plants. So we had some good luck with some good rates. So overall, the water and sewer fund ended up with we're projecting a surplus of $650,000 when the budget was basically a balanced budget in the water and sewer. So this leaves us in a good reserve position, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. But first, I'm going to remind you of a policy we talked about last year. And I won't spend a lot of time on it, but before I leave the projection side, is there any questions on the fiscal year 2021 projections? No? Okay, I hope you guys are happy. I'm happy. I love saving money.
Yeah.
That makes me happy. So,
My thought is that if you can go ahead and show that you can save this kind of money outside of some of the overtime earmarked for the police department and perhaps some for community events, it seems to me like this could be, a operating procedure that we just adopt in general. I mean, I know what we're talking about, supplying or bolstering the revenue for the reserve accounts, which is a good thing to do. But if we've shown that we can operate under a stricter budget, I think we ought to take a lesson from that and continue it.
Well, but didn't we put off a lot of projects that, made us under budget? It's not that we just,
my thought is that if we, just
Deferred.
because we have it doesn't necessarily mean we should spend it. And to a lesser degree, East Dundee is guilty of this, just like every other municipality is. But, we're still carrying a pretty heavy long-term debt on the village, and my thought is I'm really happy to see that we're boosting the reserve accounts, especially for water and sewer, perhaps roads. But if we are able to survive just fine with tightening the budget or tightening the belt, I think that's something that we should probably adopt as, like I say, standard operating procedure.
so we'll get through, we'll get to that point. We're going to hit on reserves quickly, Jeff, and then we'll get on the larger projects. And that would be the area I specifically call out in this memo where we would be using the reserves. And that would be, if the board doesn't want any reserves, those would be easy things to cut, to use any reserves. That would be easy things to cut from the budget. So we'll get to that in a minute. So real quickly, we don't have a strong cash balance policy here in the village. Now, a lot of times you'll have a fund balance policy in a village, and we kind of have one that's says we should have 25% in reserves. But obviously, there were time periods where we didn't have that. And so we should have had a plan in place to replenish it. But we have a plan now, and we're far exceeding that 25%. So my recommendation is to use a cash balance policy, because we can't really use a fund balance policy because we have borrowed for the TIF funds from the general fund. So if you go to the audit, you turn into the page and you look at the fund balance, it's kind of arbitrary. When the TIF fund owes the general $6 million, it looks like the general fund has $6 million more than it has. Well, it doesn't have that yet. It may have that later if the TIF can pay the general back. So we just like to look at cash in the bank. It's actually a much easier way to think about. money anyway, because that's how we think about it in our lives. So this policy calls for the 25% reserves in the general fund and in the water and sewer fund, because those are our two primary operating funds. So we always want to know that if something happened like COVID or anything else, we could operate for a period of 3 months with no revenue. That's the idea of the 25%. The 25% is very standard in government. It may be on the low side. I have seen 40% only in small municipalities though. Larger municipalities usually go for the 25%, sometimes less, because 25% of their budget is just too much to save. It's very difficult for them to attain. So this policy calls for 25% plus 10% cash flow, because we can't really maintain that 25% at all times. The way that revenue comes in and expenditures go out, it's not always in sync, right? We receive things and spend things at different times. So if you go on to the top of page 4 or top of page 5, I take this and, or bottom of page 4, top of page 5, I start talking about the surplus. So everything I'm presenting to you as if we were adopting this policy. So the board did support this policy at the last budget workshop, but when COVID hit, it didn't make any sense to adopt the policy anymore. We didn't know what was going to happen to our reserves. And frankly, you know, we did the best we could to cut and then weather the storm. But now we're in a good position where we really can look at this policy and implement it and put it in place. So the top of page 5, I've tried to compare the beginning of this fiscal year that we're talking about, 21 to 22, and then the end and what it would look like. So in the beginning of, at May 1st, 2021, you're going to see that first gray column on the top of page 5. You'll see that we will have a cash balance in the general of about 2.8. Water and sewer will have about 2.2 for a total of $5 million. We do have other reserves, but this is the operating reserves that I'm speaking about. A lot of the TIF reserves are set aside for debt service, so we're not really focused on that because they're not really liquid to use. So you'll see overall between the two funds, that would be an estimated cash balance of 55%. So that far exceeds the 35% required by our policy. So by the end of this fiscal year, if this budget were to be approved as is, we would be using some of the reserves, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that would put us down to about a 49% reserve with a total of 4.5 million. So that still exceeds what would be required, which is the white row there, you'll see in white, of 3.2. So it leaves us with $3.2 million reserve, plus, in theory, another $1.3 million. We can do anything we would like to do. This budget calls for saving those funds because we still want to save for future capital projects. We never want to spend all of our funds available at one time. And that's why we have a capital improvement plan that's 5 years out. So the policy, if adopted, would call for these excess reserves to be restricted for capital projects. So in general, at the end of the fiscal year, it would be about $786,000. That would be transferred to capital projects, which is nice because the only funding stream for capital projects right now is the gaming revenue. So obviously capital projects took a hit this year with the lack of gaming. So this would be a nice nest egg to put in the capital projects fund to fund our 5-year capital plan or help it. And then the remaining would remain in the water and sewer. The 500,000 would remain in water and sewer for the same thing, for capital items only, not for operations. So they kind of have their own capital improvement plan within the water and sewer because they're an enterprise fund, so we keep them separate. So that would leave us about $1.3 million for our future projects down the road.
Jennifer, quick question. Is there any value? I mean, I understand that, you know, again, Jeff had mentioned long-term debt, and my recollection is it was all for essentially like infrastructure, you know, water treatment, wastewater, what have you. What I don't remember is, the rates that we got. I mean, I don't know if it's essentially a low enough rate where it's almost like free money. Is
Mhm.
there any value to paying down some long-term debt or even some short-term debt rather than transferring it all into the capital reserve and then maybe improving our Moody's rating?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. We just went back to revisit this question. So there's actually only two bonds that we can really touch and do anything with. So unfortunately, those are ones that are really not significant. They're the 2012A and 2012B, and there are lower ones. So what we should look at, the bonds that really are more of an impact for the village are the 2015 and 2016. Those are the police station and downtown improvement bonds. And there's really nothing we can do as far as like paying ahead. I mean, we could set it aside ourselves. It may make sense to set it aside, but we don't get discounted, I guess, by paying ahead. We're stuck in a bond structure, and we can't get out of it for a time period. Now, Brandis is on the phone now, and I believe that was 2025. Brandis, is that the one time we can touch the two bonds?
You're muted.
I think she's, yeah.
Sorry, yes, I believe it's 2024 or 2025 is when we can start the recall process.
Yeah. And then
Is
we
there any
would be able
penalty
to put
paying those
ourselves.
off early? When we say we can't touch them to 2024, 25, there's no penalty on us if we were to exhaust them or pay them off early. We just from a money standpoint, we may not be saving in it, but we at least get them off our books, correct? And the 2012 ones, it would only make sense if we had the money just to get them off the books, even though we may not be charged a lot of interest along the way. My thought is if we can, we should, or if we can, why shouldn't we?
Well, we can't. So on the 2012A, I just pulled up, it's page 17 of your packet. We have about $2.5 million in principal, and we still have interest payments. So when I say there's no benefit to paying it off, like we can't get out of, because it's all structured, we can't necessarily get out of it.
So we're not saving anything by paying it off early.
We're not really saving anything. We're not really saving anything. And it also will use up the reserves that we might need for other projects, forcing us to borrow for other things. So you kind of have to think of it that way. It's not a bad idea, and I'm not discounting it. And we can research it further, but we've talked to them twice, and there was really nothing we can do that would be so beneficial. We'd also have to pay for all the bond restructuring fees. So they roll that all in, just like if you refinance your house, and then you end up with actually owing more in some cases. So we just didn't feel like we got that much ahead. The 2012B doesn't make sense because that is partially funded by JD Byrider. So that one doesn't make any sense to touch. So, I mean, if you like, we can always look into that more.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend, I guess, on what their actual maturity date is on all of them, which is going to be different on all of them, right? But also, I guess I would say, looking at this from an overview, our debt has gone down significantly and our savings has gone up significantly. It seems like we're on a really good path, generally speaking. I don't know.
Yeah, we've never had a problem servicing our debt. I mean, that I'm aware of. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
like,
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that statement, Scott. And there could be years that are more difficult down the road. So you kind of have to, like in the TIF, so you have to kind of prepare for that. We have one TIF that will fall off. So having this excess to manage it will be good for the village, rather than taking all of our liquidity and putting it towards our debt, because we are following our debt schedules and we're following just fine, just like your house, you know. When you get to the end of the 30 years, you're done. So that's how we kind of look at it.
I had a question. Our Moody's rating was not good based on the past couple of years. And when are we up for getting that relooked at or reevaluated and re-rated? And then the other thing is does that help us with any of our debt, or is that only for future kind of financing? Is there?
Yeah. So last year it was about March, I believe, and because it was right around COVID. So we did go from a negative outlook to a stable outlook, and we would have done a lot better but they wrote this COVID thing in there saying, we don't know what's going to happen. So they usually come back once a year, but we actually had to pressure them last time to come back. We're like, we have good news. Please come rate us again, because we've done really well. And so we'll reach out to them and try to get them to look at us again. And it would affect a bond restructuring. Yeah, it would. So we would get better rates now than we had before.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I got a quick question. That $90,000 that you said that we didn't have to pay, I guess it was just kind of, I don't want to say it was avoided, for Speedway and Ford, Dundee Ford. Because they didn't meet the criteria to get that payout, does that mean that it's off the boards, or is that as soon as they open and as soon as they meet those project requirements, are we going to end up having to pay it? I mean, so in other words, is it just deferred or is it eliminated?
Okay. There are two separate redevelopment agreements. So the first one is Dundee Ford. If you recall that Dundee Ford was purchased, they bought Cucci Auto. And when they came in, they threatened to move out. And so their redevelopment agreement says you have to meet a threshold of X amount of dollars before we'll rebate anything back to you on an annual basis. So they told us they came in and said, oh, we're going to quadruple sales. We know what we're doing and yada, yada. And they do, they seem like a good dealership. They have other dealerships, but 2 years now, because they had the learning curve the first year of being the first year in East Dundee. Now they had a COVID year. They haven't been able to meet that threshold to get a rebate. So that's gone for that year. Okay. They only get the rebate if the village receives more than $300,000 in sales tax from them, then we share sales tax rebates with them. They have not been able to meet the threshold. And that's why we structured that agreement that way. Lael was in that, I remember that. And so we did really well. That was a really good restructuring of that agreement because we haven't paid anything. The Speedway, we haven't paid because they're not open. So they get 41% of sales tax receipts until they meet the threshold, and they've not been able to get anything because they're not open. So they'll get whatever 2.5 million less the grant that we received over 15 years, and they'll get it 41% of sales tax rebated every year.
Okay,
So
can I ask then, has Dundee Ford expressed at all the opinion that the $300,000 of sales tax is, how would I say it, restrictive, too onerous, whatever? Or are they just fine with that agreement?
I have not heard otherwise. I do the analysis for them. They provide the receipts monthly. I did the analysis. I provided an explanation. You'll not be receiving any reimbursements this year. And they said, okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
So they agreed to the agreement. So I haven't heard otherwise. Could they change their mind in the future? Sure.
Yeah.
He was he knows what he's doing. He owns a lot of dealerships and he's a tough guy. So he may come back. Yes.
Okay.
But this is a win for the village right now. So.
Yeah, just to clarify, there's nothing that they would do that would allow them, we wouldn't have to pay them back this money ever. They could earn it again next year, but that's a whole separate thing.
Assuming though that they meet the tax
If
threshold.
they meet it next year, if both of these people could assume that same amount of money, but the money that they've
Right.
let go so far, they can't get back.
Yeah.
So-
And we want them to make it because we get 50%
Yeah.
of whatever they get over 300.
Right.
We want
right.
them to do better, but they haven't because it's tough markets, you know?
Okay, but
So-
I guess what I'm wondering is they're not sitting on a tougher deal or a more restrictive deal than say Pamonte Chevrolet,
No.
correct?
No, they have a better deal.
And they
Okay,
were thrilled
No.
to take this. They were thrilled with this deal.
okay.
So,
Just want to make sure.
Okay, now we're going to roll into the budget that's presented, the focus of our workshop tonight. So obviously, this is a balanced budget. So I'm going to talk about some of that. So the general fund is balanced and the water and sewer fund is not balanced. And I'll talk about why in a minute. And basically it's to use some of the accumulated reserves for a project, a very large project that we think would be an exciting and necessary project in the village. The TIF funds, the TIF and BDD, this is probably one of the most exciting items for me. When you add all the BDDs together and all the TIFs together, they're balanced. That's very close to the best news I've seen. And basically it's because we've paid down a lot of our economic development obligations. We really only have a handful left in the budget. And the EAV has grown 55% since 2014. So that EAV growth has been captured as revenue in the TIF funds. So we've had revenue growth and we've had obligations paid down, and now we have a balanced budget. I've said this before, but I want to remind you, if it weren't for the police station debt in the TIF funds towards the downtown TIF, the TIFs would even look better. Okay, so part of this is a conscious decision that was made, which is a good one, to put the police station towards the TIF funds. But even with that debt, which is $900,000 a year for each fund, we are able to balance the TIF funds. So that is great news. On the revenue side of things, I'll talk about the general fund. So Brandis and I worked very hard on the revenue projections. We were a little thrown off by how well we did this year. But we still tried to be somewhat conservative, a little bit conservative on the revenue projection side, as we always are. And the primary reason for that is so many of our revenue streams are volatile. And we have to always keep that in mind. You know, there are other municipalities that rely solely on property taxes or 50%. We don't. You will see, you know, that chart. I'm on page 6 here of the memo, and you're going to see the breakdown of how the taxes come in. And you're going to see the home rule sales tax and the sales tax alone are 50% of our revenue. So we always have to be somewhat conservative, but we do feel good about our projections. The revenue history has been very stable since here the fiscal 17 audit. It's going to look low on that chart on page 6 only because we're not showing home rule sales tax there, but we did have home rule sales tax. A couple of years ago, we consolidated that and put that into the general fund. So basically, you're going to see that the taxes and the revenue stream in the general fund has remained around $6 million. And it's actually slowly growing, and that's because of our businesses. Our businesses are growing, and like things like building permits and people are building. So our revenues in the general fund are growing slowly, but they've been very stable despite having revenue streams that are slightly unstable. So the village is on the bottom of page 6. We talk about the village as projecting a decrease over the fiscal year 2021 estimates, and this is for the following reasons. We're not going to be receiving that COVID relief funding, And we're also, although we're budgeting a little bit higher, we're not going to budget that kind of building permit revenue this year. If we are able to bring some big projects in, that's great. But we don't think we'll bring in as many as we did this year. Like, for example, 3 Prairie Lakes developments was huge. And those were things that there were no redevelopment agreements in place for those. So they occurred with all of the revenues coming into the village and the village not rebating anything back. So we haven't projected any of that into the budget. We have gotten word that we will receive about $400,000 in COVID relief money. We haven't budgeted that because we received that information late last week, and I don't know what strings are attached to that. With the first round, there was a lot of strings attached to it. With this round, it may just be a check that comes to the village. So we have to wait and see, but to take the conservative route, we have not budgeted for. We could certainly budget it if you would like. We could assign a project to it. We could do lots of things with it, but at this point, it's not in the budget, just to be conservative. General fund expenditures. There are approximately
Jennifer,
yes.
I had a question
I'm sorry, before we,
about the licenses.
Mhm.
They've decreased quite a bit. Is there a license or that we've gotten rid of, or what accounts to the decrease in the revenue and licenses?
Sure. That was partially in part because of our prorated liquor license. If you recall,
Yes,
we discounted the liquor license, and that hit this fiscal year.
got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. On the general fund expenditure side, we're projecting that the expenditures will be $469,000 higher than the budget. And partly that's because there's a few reasons, but one is obviously we made significant expenditure reductions for the last fiscal year. So these are more in line on where the budget would have been last year without the cuts, like cutting all the events and so forth. We also have to account for the increase in the police pension contribution that's required, and also some of the projects that are included in the general fund that we will outline in a spreadsheet below. So you're going to see the first chart. I've mislabeled this. I apologize. I found it this morning. It should say general fund expenditure history. So you're going to see the general fund expenditures are going up. Some of that reason is a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, we started budgeting for contingency, about 100,000. We've also budgeted for sales tax agreements that we didn't have before, and we talked about those. And then we had to account for the overall increases over time, such as salaries and staffing changes. So that's where we get from 16 to 22, from about $1 million in growth in expenditures. You're going to see, George isn't going to want you to see, but on the bottom of page 7, you're going to see that the police department's 50%, 57% of the budget. That's no surprise. Salaries are most of our budget. And I think when we talk about that, we just have to remember that's what we do. We provide people to provide services. So the police department has a large salary budget. Their budget is almost all salaries. And so that's why you're going to see that they're 57% of the budget.
That's not to say that there isn't room to trim though, correct? I mean, just because they're 57% of the budget doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be.
Yeah, we could just have one cop going around town.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not
there's things that
suggesting
need to
that,
be
Scott.
provided.
I'm just
There are
saying,
services that need to be provided, and they have a cost.
okay.
Okay. So the budget also includes, I talked about the contingency, same as last year, the budget includes a contingency of $50,000 in each, the general fund and the water and sewer operating funds. So the purpose of the contingency is to kind of soften the blow from revenue losses, fund unanticipated expenditures. Like almost all of the $50,000 in the general fund this year was used for COVID. because we started buying things that we didn't anticipate. So it was a good way for us to track it as well, although we still ended up under budget. So even though we charged things to contingency, overall, we still ended up under budget. But the contingency is something that we do just to basically provide us with that opportunity to spend something if the need arises. The debt, we talked about debt a little bit. So there is a debt schedule. And you can see that we've gone from about $29 million in debt. And by the end of this year, we'll be at about 15.6 million in principal. So we also obviously pay interest on that, but that's the principal balance. So we've cut the debt in half because we just made the debt payments according to the debt schedules that we've been given. And we will be able to do that for the foreseeable future. We also have some of our economic development obligations. And I explained to you earlier, this is a relatively short list on the bottom of page 8. Some of these are very minor too. Some of these are very small payments or obligations that, you know, are out there. Some of these, like Pale Land, are derived from the revenue coming in. So we get 100%, we give 90% back. So there's not necessarily a real loss to the village. So this is a very short list. Since we have about 40 development agreements that I know of, we're down to a very, very short list for the village, but all of those have been budgeted for and accounted for. The use of cash reserves. So as I mentioned earlier, we are requesting to use reserves from 2 different funds. Last year, we used reserves from the Street and Bridge Fund, which is a separate fund that collects a separate stream of revenue. It's very little revenue. It's about $40,000 a year. So it took us a while to accumulate, but then we went ahead and used it. So this year we're asking to use money from the Motor Fuel Tax Fund, which is a similar fund. We collect a little bit, about 70,000, but it's gone up recently and over time. And then we eventually get to do a project, but MFT has to be kept with MFT. It's an IDOT requirement, so we can't really take it and move it around and use it how we want to. We're very limited in the use, but streets is what it's for. So we would like to use some of those accumulated reserves to do our street improvement project this year. Again, it's not a large project, and we'll talk about it more, but it will put the revenues minus expenditures net position at about -180. It still leaves us with a positive balance at the end, but it does use those reserves. Same as the water and sewer. The primary project that would put the water and sewer over budget and into the reserve category would be the repainting of Route 25 water tower. So I have an image here so you can recall what it looks like. And Phil will talk about the need for that water tower when we get to that item. So I don't want to hit on it too much, but those would be the 2 funds where we would tap into the reserves in order to, if this budget were to be approved as presented.
Maybe we can make an effort to earmark the 400,000 that we're getting from COVID that we all, can't really rely on at this point, but to maybe augment that reserve a little bit, rather than spend it on who knows what, a new logo or whatever. We can put that money towards that water supply or that water fund, because it's an expensive department to run.
I mean, that might depend on the restrictions that they put on us for the use of it. But yeah, in theory, that would be extra. We also historically have come out ahead of budget every year. Average, we're probably about $1 million a year. So even saying using the reserves is sometimes like using the reserves, because we've been doing so well every year. We may not really be tapping into them, but we do have to budget and assume that, that this is the way it's going to come in at the end of the day, that we are going to make the expenditures that are budget and the revenue is going to come in the way it's estimated. But as you can see, I described this fiscal year we're in, that's not always the case. Oftentimes we do better. And we budget hoping we're going to do better. We don't budget so close to the line that we end up worse than we thought, because that's just not fiscally responsible. So Jeff, maybe we might not even need this, but we can focus on that money coming in, depending on, what the restrictions are in place. Maybe there are none,
Okay.
So now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to go ahead and share a screen, which is going to be, it's in your packet, but I'm going to share it just so it's easier for you to see. This is going to be the spreadsheet where we talk about all the new projects and initiatives. So when we are working on the budget, I asked the department heads, and I did ask the board, and I got some feedback. Give me any new projects and initiatives. So if they have something new that isn't typical operations, they have to put it on a form, and they have to come to me and explain, this is what I want, and this is what I want, why I want it, and this is how much it costs. So we take those and assemble them into this spreadsheet, so you can see really what's changed from last year to this year. So you can kind of think of the budget as it was last year's budget, but with these changes. So I'm going to go ahead and share that screen with you now. Okay, let me know if everybody can see the spreadsheet I'm referring to.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully the whole thing. Okay, so I am sorry, George, but yours is actually first. You have that first item at the top.
Yeah. This is a request for 2 additional sergeant positions. We have 4 shifts of 12 hours each, but we only have 2 sergeants. And that is certainly not best practice, and it's not my recommendation. We need a sergeant for each shift, and this would accomplish that. You want me to go right down here?
Well, yeah, let's pause for a moment so we can talk about this. You're going to see on the deferred list when we get to this, this does not call for the backfilling of these positions. So basically, we're taking 2 officers and we're going through the testing process, and we'll promote them to sergeant so that we have more shifts covered by sergeants. So there are many shifts right now where we just have an officer in charge. As a result, we have to pay officer in charge pay. So we haven't even really accounted that, because that's a difficult number to really wrestle with. But this $9,000 would cover the promotion, and it would cover it for about a 6-month period. You're probably wondering why it doesn't cost very much. And that's because the sergeants, the officers that are going to be promoted, there isn't a big differential between what the officer makes and the sergeant makes. It's actually a small differential. So it makes a lot of sense to George, Shanita, to me, to make this promotion, have the supervisors on each shift, because it's a very little cost to the village, and it would definitely be a savings for us on the liability side. George has asked for a couple of years, and it's in the deferment list, to backfill these with more officers. George was really nice to me this year, and he didn't ask for that, because I just keep saying no to him. So I'm sorry, George, but he came up with a good compromise. We thought this was a great compromise. It definitely satisfies our needs at this moment, and that is why we're bringing it forth. Are there any questions for George about this item? I know that this is probably one of the more sensitive items, and I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it.
I have a question. Oh, you mentioned that it by having a sergeant on every shift, that it reduces our risk cost. I'm assuming that's like insurance or liability, or something of that nature. I mean, there isn't actually like a appreciable savings by having a sergeant on every shift.
Well, the insurance company is probably not going to give us that discount. I would like to say that they would, but I really meant like in the end.
Got it. Okay.
In the, I think we'll have less issues, especially in the world we're in right now. We're in a very litigious world with a strong focus on the police. And if you're in the position where you don't have a supervisor and something happens, we're going to have to explain that, why we don't have a supervisor on shift.
So basically having two additional sergeants is risk management by virtue of almost like providing insurance against, bad things that would cost a lot of money.
Yeah, it is. And it seems to me that there's a far less likelihood of being sued because of that.
Okay.
We have experienced supervisors on duty at all times is the idea.
Okay.
Well, if these officers are coming from the ranks and they're already experienced, I'm really not sure that makes a whole lot of sense to me, George. I'd also like to ask, have you done any analysis for the cost for the officer on charge pay compared to these promotions? I mean, if we're talking about a $92 bump, is that something that we can save by just not putting sergeants or promoting these sergeants? Also, if we have 2 sergeants already, we're putting two more in. How many shifts do we have in a day?
We have
I'm assuming
4.
3.
We have 4 12-hour shifts total. So that's 2 shifts each day. And what we're doing is we are planning to have no supervisor on duty half of the time. And that's not responsible in my opinion. So we want to have a supervisor for each and every shift.
So
Yeah, this is Kirsten. I agree with George. I think that's the reasonable way to go with this. And I think it's effectively ensuring as best as we can that from an operational standpoint, we're not going to end up in a bind or people questioning how we're doing business. And I think in the long run, that's a great investment, not only for the village as a whole from that liability standpoint, but for the officers that are on his staff that can now have support from a sergeant whenever they're working.
I guess I get that, these sergeants are saving us, maybe the liability risk, and it's not that much more money up front, but I do wonder, do sergeants cost us more on the pension front
Absolutely.
than a patrolman?
Well, the pension is based on the salary and the salary is higher for sergeants.
So there you go.
But we've also been paying officer in charge bumps, premiums for our regular officers when they are the officer in charge when there isn't a sergeant available.
That's true.
So we weren't
True
able
enough, but I don't think that.
Hang on, Jeff.
Okay.
So we weren't able to quantify how much we paid an officer in charge fees this year.
Speak to that. So far, we've paid between like $3,500 to $4,000, $3,500 to $4,000 so far.
To each officer or in total?
Just in total.
Okay, thank you. So we're looking at a bump of $5,000 really to have two additional sergeants. So on the books for the increase for full year for 2 new sergeants, it would be $9,000, but we're already paying out about $4,000.
Actually, no, if it's $3,500 already this year, that's basically a third of the year. It's a quarter. So we'd be looking at 14,000 8 officer in charge fees, which would then be coming away and replaced with a $9,200 fee, or not fee, but salary for 2 sergeants. I mean, Jeff, you shake your head no, but
When?
Beth.
Yeah, it's definitely not a wash, and I don't want to give you the impression that it is a wash. It's a cost. It's just, relatively speaking, in the grand scope of the budget, it's a very insignificant cost.
You know
when
what?
you think about some of our costs for our events or other things, it is relatively insignificant. And so you would take the pension obligation would be a percentage of the payroll increase. So even that is relatively insignificant. The pension burden becomes a lot higher when you take on new staff, not when staff receive a salary increase. That's actually expected and rolled into the assumptions by the actuary. So that cost is relatively low, but I just want you to understand it isn't a direct wash. We just didn't feel like it was a significant expenditure enough not to do it, just because of the benefit of having a supervisor on the street.
Jennifer, is that 14,000 approximately? I'm just using round numbers based on 3,500 to this point.
Yeah.
Is that basically already cooked into the budget? And then having the sergeants on top of that would represent a $9,000 charge? Or is it kind of somewhere in the middle? That makes sense.
Yeah, I'd have to ask Brandis, but we basically take that history and roll it into the salary projections. It
So it is
probably
cooked
is, but if you go to the salary page for the police officers, you're going to see it's millions of dollars. So yeah, we could take 3,000 or 4,000 out. It's not going to make a big dent. We probably could roll back the officer in charge pay. I don't think we really did that. To your question, if that's your question.
In my opinion, again,
No, we did
I
not.
may disagree. I would rather have the police department have the 9,000 and take it away from somewhere else, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we've
But
got
we won't do that, Scott.
Jeff, hold on a second, please.
Yeah.
We've got a village that basically has a lot of whether it's the bars, restaurants, retail. I mean, there are certain things that require police service. And but I'm not willing to all of a sudden be either understaffed or improperly staffed, because again, that does cause problems. And again, you can't look at a raw number and just be like, well, it's $9,000 more. You actually have to look at the practical impact of that number over time.
Mhm.
And again, it takes one lawsuit. I mean, hell, Minneapolis, Minnesota just settled one for $27 million. It's not that would ever happen here, but I'm just saying there are risks to doing things on the cheap. And again, $9,000 on a budget of, 7 million or whatever it is. I mean, it's de minimis.
Yeah, I'm with you, Scott. I think we should promote the sergeants.
I mean, I guess I agree that 9,000 is pennies, comparatively, but we are talking about $9,000 per year, and we're deferring backfilling those patrolmen, which means it'll come up again next year or the year after that we want to add those people. So there will be significant more pension costs and all that if we add those patrolmen on top of hiring these sergeants. So maybe we'll just cross that bridge when we come to it, but I just want to throw that out there.
My guess would be that if we were going to be adding patrolmen or what have you, it's because we've got more things going on in the village, hopefully more things that are generating revenue. So at some level, it'll almost be a good problem to have. It's like people hate paying taxes, but you know what? It means you made money.
Mhm.
Right. All right. Okay.
So,
And I agree. We should be making that expense of the 9,200.
So is it fair to say that if we approve this budget, this is going to go through, correct?
well, what we're looking for tonight is consensus on what would be in the budget that would be approved at a later meeting. So as we go through these items, we're looking for a thumbs up or a thumbs down or something new, that isn't in there. So, but I think we should probably recess into our 6 o'clock public hearing real quick, President Moore.
Yeah, it is 6 o'clock.
Okay, we have one quick item. Are we just gonna recess and come back?
Do we have to log in under a different account or a different login?
No.
Okay.
Stay where we're at?
I'm sorry, I meant to mention the Zoom link will be for the entire night, so nobody exit. We just, I think, need to motion to recess and then go into the other meeting and then roll call.
I will ask for a motion to recess this meeting.
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
Third.
Trustee Lineham,
Yes.
trustee Sella,
Yes.
trustee Wood,
yes,
trustee Mahoney,
Yes.
trustee Andreessen,
Yes.
trustee Coonsey,
Yes.
and President Miller.
Yes. All right, very good. So we have returned to our special committee of the whole meeting. Catherine, you want to call the roll, please?
Trustee Lineham,
Here.
trustee Sella,
Here.
trustee Wood,
here,
trustee Mahoney,
Here.
trustee Andreessen,
Here.
trustee Coonsey,
Here.
and President Miller.
Here. Okay, I believe we left off with Administrator Johnson and we were on the budget.
Yes, thank you. So I have reshared this spreadsheet that we were viewing item by item. So I guess before we leave this item, we've heard some support, some opposition for this. Is there anything else to say about this, sergeants, or are we okay to move on to the next one?
I think we can move on.
Okay. All right, George, you have the next one as well.
Yeah. Yeah, the next item is a request for 2 police mountain bikes. We would like to start a police bicycle unit. We have the interest. We have a number of officers expressing interest. And I've seen this work really well in other communities. I think it would work well in East Dundee. Reason being that in weather that, you know, in good weather situations, police officers on bikes are far easier for people to speak with. And gosh, I've had people want their young children to pose with the police officer on the bike for photographs. And I'm thinking of the festivals and the special events here in East Dundee. My goodness, police on bikes are approachable and they're friendly, they're outgoing. And I just think they would be famously popular at our outdoor festival activities in the good weather. So they do require specialized training. It's a 4 days of training. Shanita, is that what you found?
Yeah, it'd be a 4-day training.
And it's not like they can just jump on a bike and because everyone can ride a bike. No, they have specialized training. And you know, I just think this would be a very popular program, and thus the request for 2 mountain bikes. They would be different sizes. And they're about what, 2,200 a piece. And the reason being they're also battery powered. If the officer has to get someone in a hurry, if there's an emergency, he or she can switch on the battery power to save the legs. Next item is a request for just
before we leave that item, if we could just give the board an opportunity to weigh in after each item. Thank you.
I like the idea because I think community policing is important, especially in a small town like East Dundee, where we do have a lot of outdoor events. And to be honest, the climate nationally with regard to police and communities has not been good. And I think this is a really positive step to not only present our police force in a more approachable way, but I think, you know, they become ambassadors of our village, you know, whether it's at village events, whether it's as they're patrolling the downtown district or whatever. I like the idea. Like Georgia said, I've seen it in a number of other like communities, particularly tourist communities, you know, even those in Illinois and what have you. And I think it's a great idea.
I like the idea as well, specifically because we have the Fox River Trail, which is, you know, quite a treasure, right running through our village. To be able to have that tie in and also the ability to get around on the trail if necessary is a really great thing, and could be a great thing for the village.
And I neglected to address the trail, but clearly we would have a presence on the trail as it goes through East Dundee.
I got your back, George.
Are we talking about having, I mean, we have how many officers on patrol at a given time, given our shift schedule, is 2 and a supervisor? Is that the goal?
2 plus the supervisor, yes.
So the two officers, the two patrolmen who are on duty are typically in their cars the
Yes.
entire shift? Okay.
Yes.
So I guess, maybe something to think about is that, you're going to be saving a little bit on your cruiser's wear and tear over time, but
Yeah, what we would do is we would put the mountain bike on the back of the squad car, and the officer, can pull over and jump on the bike anytime they want. It wouldn't necessarily have to be for the full shift. No, for part of the shift.
George, would they also be using the bikes, for example, when we have additional officers on, working because of a village event or something of that nature?
Absolutely. That's the biggest selling point in my mind for the special events. The officers on a bike are much more approachable than the officer in the squad car.
Agreed.
I would agree with that, only how much more approachable could an officer be on a bike than on foot? When we're talking about community events and they're patrolling the area, they're on foot. I mean, this is probably the epitome of a wish list item. I don't even know how to respond to this. So are we going to have 2 additional officers on any shift that would be on a bike in addition to the ones that would be on the road?
No.
Or are we going to take 2 officers off the road and put them on bikes?
Well, no, sir. Officers would still be on mobile patrol, but one of them would be given a bicycle, and he or she can use it as they see fit during the shift. And
Hey, George,
yes.
it's Kirsten. You know what? I agree. I like the bike idea. Is there an option from your leadership and your management standpoint for you guys to incorporate that shift as a foot patrol / bike? Because I think foot patrols are important as well, especially in the downtown area during the warm summer months, to have an officer walking around down there as part of their duty during their shift.
Right.
Incorporated also with that bike duty. I think that's a really great community feature.
Yeah. So it's the essence of community policing because it's more direct interaction with residents and businesses. And it's just a new way of approaching patrol. Yes, we can be on foot now and we can be in motor patrol. This would add the bicycle. And of course, it requires your approval of the program, which is why we ask for the budget request.
I personally think it fits with everything we're trying to do, but
I would like to know what that is, actually, but.
I mean, it's easy to say we're going to spend money on anything, and then, you get what you pay for. You pay for nothing, you get nothing. I mean, as we're trying to grow this village, grow development, grow our events, have broader showcases to people. I mean, I've spoken to people who moved to this town after coming to events.
Okay.
I mean, that can only be a positive thing. And
I agree.
To have our police force have an additional, I don't want to say weapon at their disposal, have an additional option at their disposal for policing and for that is, integrated with our events and some of the things that we want to do as a village as far as being more welcoming and, have the appearance of safety and, police incorporated with the community. I mean, again, these are very small costs. I think they give us a lot of reward, give us a lot of benefit in return.
Yeah, and I'm not going to argue any of that. What I'm arguing, or what I'm trying to get a handle on, are the logistics of this kind of thing. And one of them is, if we know, and George, you're saying that we're not going to be increasing manpower on any given shift, that these are just an extra vehicle for an officer in a cruiser to get out of his car and get on a bike and go. I'm struggling with this one.
Well,
what I'm suggesting is that what we're talking about doing here is just spending money for no good reason other than to spend money. We're talking now about training officers on how to ride a bike. And then we're going to have to add another $1,000 for the mount on the back of the cruiser. And then likely, and it wouldn't surprise me a bit if within another couple of months, we're going to be asked to add another head count because the bikes just aren't going to do what they're meant to do without more people riding them.
Well, we would only have one person at a time with a mountain bike. And I can only tell you that this has been very successful in some of my prior agencies. Residents really do like it.
You know, I don't know if it's a question of what the residents like. It's more what the residents can afford. And at this point, when we just talked about having over $15 million in long-term debt, the idea of spending another $5,000 on bicycles seems to be a bit frivolous. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well,
it's just a proposal.
I know.
I guess
I'm just hoping that people are looking at it from a different perspective other than, you know, optics. You know, and I understand the arguments, I do, and it is good for a presence in the downtown. But if we're talking about the biggest benefit is going to be during community events and, you know, approachability for our police officers with residents and so forth, it seems to me that if they were on foot, that would probably be enhanced rather than a bike. But I don't know.
I guess my question is, Jeff brings up the training and the mounts for the bikes. I mean, is this $4,400 price tag? Is that all encompassing for all that stuff, or
No,
is that just for the bikes alone?
It's just for the bikes alone, but the training is in the training budget.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Okay,
I'm a thumbs up.
got it. All right, let's move on to the training.
Okay, and just before I forgot to mention, just as we look at the general fund, this is our last general fund new initiative. We do have a $45,000 surplus with the budget that's presented right now. So there actually is additional $45,000 that could be spent if you would like, and anything cut just increases that surplus amount. So go ahead, George, with the training.
The training, this nearly $10,000 request is to send the Deputy Chief, Shanita Stewart, to the Senior Management Institute for Police. That is it's the best 3 weeks I ever spent in training in all of my years. It's just sensational. And it's put on by the Police Executive Research Forum in Boston every summer. Back in the day, it was one session per summer. Today, they're doing 4 sessions per summer. And there's a waiting list, and I have Shanita on it. And I think it's essential for her development. She already, has excellent training in her background. This would be in addition to what she's already done earlier in her career.
Well, I guess I'll just jump in and say this is a no-brainer. One of the things that George has been excellent at after he was brought on board is he has massively improved the training that all of our officers receive. He's upgraded our staff, even, with our existing staff and with the addition of new officers immensely. And again, I don't see why we wouldn't want the best training for our men and women in blue.
And this is the best training that I've ever had. And it's the Police Executive Research Forum. If you're not familiar with it, they're one of the top law enforcement agencies in the country. And this is just sensational training. They bring in people, not just from around the country, from around the world to do the training.
And again, this is training that's going to trickle down to all of our officers. I mean, when she comes back with these new skills that she's going to, or new skill sets and new knowledge, I mean, that's going to benefit our entire force.
That's very true.
Can I play devil's advocate one more time?
Stick what you're good at.
Okay. Can I, since George, you've already been through this training, well, let me ask you this. Is this a one and done training, or is this something that a chief or whoever would have to do periodically?
No, it's one and done, 3 weeks.
Okay, so since you've already had the benefit of this training, why couldn't you impart that knowledge onto her?
Well,
I mean, you're the administrator of this department, and we look to you for that leadership. Why would that be an outrageous assumption?
well, it's not outrageous. In my mentoring of Shanita and of others,
Mhm.
of course, I share my knowledge with them, but that doesn't mean we stop outside training. And, my judgment is this is the best training available, and it would certainly be good for her, or for any deputy chief. It would be good to have this training. It's outstanding.
I'm not
George,
arguing
can I ask how
that.
long ago you went through the training?
I'm sorry.
How long ago you went through that training?
I went in 1997.
Okay, so obviously you've built upon the skills you got then, but what she would be learning this summer is a current best practices,
Yes.
styles, what have you. So again, you would be learning from her in some respects.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would. Yes. I'm sure I would.
Okay,
Okay.
next item is equipment.
This request is for the new radio system that we're going toward. And I expect that in the summer, we will go to Starcom radios, which will mean that our current radio, the UHF band that we have, will no longer exist.
Right.
So we don't have a choice here. We
Right.
have to go to Starcom, it's called. And we're going to be getting 17 radios, and this is being coordinated by Quadcom. And all the Quadcom agencies, that's 5 police agencies, will be going to Starcom at the same time. Starcom has the benefit of allowing us to speak with any other police department in the state in an emergency. So this is an outgrowth of the Pratt shootings in where was that, Elgin?
Mhm.
A couple of years ago, and they had tremendous response from different police departments. The problem was all the police that responded were being dispatched by 5 different regional 911 centers, and they couldn't communicate. So everyone's going to Starcom, and at least in Illinois. And so we will have, what, Shanita, remind me, is it 5 or 7 years of these payments to lease to own?
To 7 release.
7 years?
Yes.
Okay.
If I could just add to what George is saying, we're actually going to be saving money this year versus what we paid last year going to these Starcom radios, due to the fact mainly that AT&T was providing the radio service last time, and because they're trying to phase out that themselves, they've jacked up the prices on that, and will actually be a little cheaper. So there you go.
Does any board member have any issue with this? It seems to be a gotta do it thing.
It is.
Well, it says here annual lease payments for 10 radios. George, did you say 17? Is it
Yeah.
17 or
Yeah,
10?
they made a mistake there.
That was my mistake. It was 17. I initially said
okay.
10 of my error.
So we're gonna have to spend $15,890 in each of the next 10 years, or however many years, or is it gonna just be until we own them?
It will take 7 years for us to own them. Right.
At 16,000 a year?
That's correct.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, the communications systems are absolutely necessary, and they're expensive.
So since they're going to a new channel, this UHF channel that's currently being utilized, if in a municipality were like fewer than 2,900, let's say, and they didn't have the money in their budget, does the state make monies available for them to subsidize this cost?
No, sir. They would have to pay another agency to do their dispatching.
Have we looked at what the cost is involved that way?
Well, since it would be an agency in this vicinity, we would be using Starcom radios regardless. And would that change? I don't know what the cost would be.
Okay, let's move on to vehicles.
So this request is for 2 new marked squad cars and the equipment that goes into it. For example, the cage in the back seat, prisoner cage, the radio, there would be a laptop in there, of course. There would be radar unit on the dashboard, things of that nature. Shanita, jump right in if I'm forgetting.
It's pretty much your basic equipment to outfit a police vehicle, make it in compliance. I think missing would be the squad rack, the AR rack, and
2 police cars.
all the equipment we currently have in all the other vehicles.
Right.
So is this apart from the 2 that got in the accident a few months back?
Yes.
So then we're talking about 4 new vehicles. Can I ask then, if for these 2 vehicles that we're talking about replacing here, what is the current odometer readings on those vehicles?
Shanita, would you know that offhand?
I don't have it in front of me, sir. I believe one was about 120 or 130,000. The other one was about 110,000.
These are in the CIP, by the way, to replace 2 squad cars each year. And yeah, I think it's unacceptable to me that we have squad cars on the road that have over 100,000 miles. Wow. Wow.
Why is that?
Weren't the cars that were involved in that accident that are being replaced, weren't those 2 of our newer cars?
One of them was our newest car.
Yeah.
And one was an older one, right?
Okay, so it's not a matter of like those new ones replacing like our oldest cars. It's just the ones that our insurance is going to take care of because of the accident are going to be replacing 2 of our newer cars, and these would have had to been replaced anyway.
Right.
Mileage and maintenance and what have you.
That's a combination, mileage and maintenance. And that's why 100,000, I use that number, is because the maintenance costs go up when you get the high miles. And plus, I'm always happier when we can turn the vehicles over, because there's new safety features that are coming all the time in these cars.
Mhm.
Okay,
If you recall also that we deferred a lot of vehicle purchases.
Yes,
We had
we did.
2 a year, and we deferred for many years in order to get back to a better financial position. So that's why these are in the budget for recommendation.
Thank you.
Well, prior to the financial crunch that we found ourselves in order to put that sort of policy forward, we went from 100,000 to 120, basically to extend the life of these vehicles and get more out of them. So my thought was we did that conscientiously. I mean, why? I don't understand. Well, I don't see that it's so much of a burden or any sort of risk that we're running by going from 100 to 120. I think that should stand.
I don't think any staff member here is familiar with that policy, Trustee Lino. I mean,
Well,
we
it
didn't
was
take that into
put into-
consideration because we didn't know there was 120,000 mile guideline.
And our cars.
I've never heard that.
These cars might be there anyway, according to what I'm hearing tonight. At least one of them might be at 120 or 130 the way it is. And again, it's not like we're going into debt to do this. The funds are available to do this. We have put it off for the last couple of years because, when the current board or whatever, like began, 4 years ago, I mean, there were some financial issues that had to be taken care of that we didn't have a choice. And these replacements were put off, and at some point you got to do it.
George or Shanita, do you have any idea what the age of these vehicles are?
Shanita?
I would have to look without
I would
being
just- I'm
present.
curious as to how many miles a year we think we put on these.
These vehicles are a 2015 and a 2016.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we could easily say then, I think that if it had 120,000 miles on it this year, then we kept driving these vehicles, it would have 140 or 145,000 miles on it next year.
30,000 a year, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're looking at extended maintenance or higher maintenance cost on a vehicle over 100,000, I can only imagine what it would be if we did 140. I'm gonna be a difference.
Well, we will save like 2 miles due to the bikes though. So.
There you go. Unless they plow the bike path, in which case they could go out year round.
Good point.
Anything more on the vehicles? We'll move on to the
Thumbs up.
Go ahead.
Just a thumbs up, Leo.
Okay. Move on to the culvert.
Bill, you're up.
Yes, good evening. So this particular budget item involves replacing a 30-inch culvert that runs beneath Dundee, just east of Ravine. The culvert is a corrugated metal pipe. The bottom section of the pipe is deteriorated fairly significantly. And so the backfill around the pipe is washing away and downstream. And if you've been by there, you'll see that part of the road is collapsing gradually above the pipe itself, and we've had to backfill, or we've had to essentially patch with asphalt. So we're recommending replacing this culvert pipe and then reinforcing the retaining with the concrete retaining wall on the upside side of the upstream side. Can't even talk about it.
Well, you can't have your money if you can't say it.
Of the culvert.
So, Phil, the
Yes.
20 grand includes replacing the corrugated, doing the backfill, and then also doing the concrete barrier, which is essentially gone because it's been crashed into and pushed over the years. So there is a little bit of a safety issue there for somebody that would find themselves in the same situation, kind of just going over the road.
Yes, that is correct. So we would be replacing that retaining wall. If there's a possibility of keeping a portion of it and replacing the damaged section, we would certainly do that. But whatever that would entail, yes, once we get into it.
All right. Does anybody have any issues with this?
Phil, if we've got, I got a question concerning it. If we're replacing a corrugated material, anytime that metal, even if it is galvanized, which I'm sure it is, comes in contact with the ground, it's going to corrode over time, and it probably will corrode a whole lot quicker than, and maybe Joe can speak to this. Is there a way that we can use a PVC type material with a thicker wall that might eliminate that corrosion?
Most
Therefore
definitely.
last longer?
We can certainly explore any and all option for a product that would last longer than a metal pipe. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I'm thinking that, just from sheer, crush, if you will, pressure that the PVC materials with a thick enough wall would certainly hold up as well as a metal. And so you won't end up, it won't rot out. In other words, this stuff has got, 100-year life on it.
Correct.
But the metal certainly doesn't. And anytime we replace the metal, we got to replace those surrounding cement walls on either side of it. So it gets pretty pricey when we do it.
Yes, certainly something we'll look into, and we've haven't had that level of detailed conversation with a contractor to this point, but certainly something we will explore as well, I guess.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other issues on that? We'll move on to village hall maintenance.
I don't know if Chris or Phil, you want to address the village hall maintenance item?
Well, this particular line item involves replacing some of the windows, or is that all of the windows? Chris, I don't know. Do you recall the labor to do that? Replacing some of the exterior wood trim on the village hall, repairing the chimney. We've got a sanitary sewer repair in the basement that needs to be addressed, and then replacing, I believe, the carpeting upstairs. But maybe Chris, you can help with some of the.
Yeah, I think you covered everything. I don't think that's going to cover all the windows to be replaced. But that would cover everything else that you had talked about, getting the outside repaired with the wood and repainted. And then that'd be most of the windows would be taken care of.
Does that include anything for the bell tower?
It we could probably get it painted, but
Is there,
as far, I'm not aware of any type of structural repairs that need to be done up there. I've never been up there.
I'm just curious. It looks like it's taken some beatings from the weather. I don't know if it needs any wood replaced or.
Yeah.
So
How's the roof?
Well, if we were to do this stuff, we would definitely want to get that in it, and then maybe not do as many windows, maybe leave some of the windows off this year if we couldn't get to all of it.
Well, I would like to see you get to as much of it as possible this year, if you could. And if you've got to bump this up a little bit to get the bell tower or cupola or whatever we're calling it fixed and replace the windows, I'd like to know what that number would be.
Okay.
I gotta think it'd be cheaper to do it all at once rather than having people come back.
Yeah, and you know, there was just so much deferred maintenance on that building, and there's windows that leak, there's wood that's rotten. It's just, I mean, it's fix your own house, right? We can't go around citing people for code violations when we got a building that looks like crap and there's wind blowing through the windows.
Yep.
And it's preventive maintenance. I mean, you got to do it.
One question I have is, Phil had mentioned like carpeting upstairs. I mean, carpeting, I mean, it is what it is. It's got its benefits, it's got its drawbacks. Has there been any thought to like doing one of those commercial grade laminate floors? Like it's like a hardwood. I mean, like the stuff in my office is rated for like 40 years commercial grade, and it's indestructible, and it was really inexpensive, or relatively inexpensive, especially compared to carpeting.
Actually, that was planned for the downstairs. We deferred the everything for COVID, and we didn't want anybody extra in the building at all. But we did plan that flooring for the downstairs, Scott, and so we could definitely explore the flooring options for upstairs. You know, we just have to do something on the stairs.
You can use the stairs as a way to do that as well. I just think it gives a nice finished appearance, and it's one of those things that it'll last you forever. I mean, it'll probably last longer than the building, even with all the repairs.
Yeah. Well, and just the overall, you know, yeah, we could certainly double or triple this. This is just our request to like, please fix the windows because many of them are broken.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they're kind of historic shape, and you know, the ones in my office. So whatever else we have, as discussed, we have plenty of reserves, and we will have a good capital projects reserve next year. So if you want us to fix the building more, we will fix the building more. we will not turn you down on that at all, because it needs a lot of work. It needs a lot of work.
Can I ask a question?
Well,
at one point we were talking about moving the village hall offices outside of that building. Are we at this point saying that we're going to stay in this building?
It would be my recommendation to stay in the building. That's of course up to the board.
Yeah.
I think that we've proven that, you know, this kind of a side topic, but we can be flexible with the way we work, and it's tight, but we have enough space for the 9 people in there. And I think it's a value keeping it. I mean, that's my opinion. But I will do whatever the board would like to do.
I would rather spend $30,000 or $40,000 and fix a building that we've had for 120 years and can keep for another 120 years than figuring out how we're going to spend $4.5 million to go build a new village.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was my point.
If anybody's got a different opinion on that, now's the time to speak out.
I guess I would reinforce that and say, if we're going to be staying there, you know, maybe we do need to look at doing, like, for example, all the windows at once rather than doing half now, half later. I mean, because there are costs to having these companies come out, getting them on a schedule. I mean, if they're going to stay there and we do have some funds to do this, let's just get it done. I mean after a while, you got to stop putting tape and spit on things to get them fixed.
No, it's more like newspapers they stuff in the windows.
Correct.
And they each have space heaters under their desk there to keep their feet warm. I mean, it's a horrible situation in the winter.
On the electric bill.
Exactly. But I think we need to do that. So, you know, this is probably one of the few times in a budget I'm going to ask you to come back and give me a bigger number for this. And let's try and find out what it's going to cost to get the wood repaired, the bell tower repaired, and then at least the windows.
And how's the roof right now?
Yeah, that's the next question, is have that inspected. It seems to be okay. But as long as they're going to be up there giving you an estimate on that, let's get that too. chimney, any masonry work that has to get done in the chimney.
Lael, is there any value to having this is what this building needs and we could prioritize?
Well, I'd like to see this done, but I'd also like to see somebody come back with a wish list for us on the village hall and say, like if we're going to stay here for the next 25 years, and it seems like we are, this is also its own capital project because, we have to maintain this historic structure for years.
Right.
And yeah, no, we're not going to get to it all in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but just like with the water system and just like with, the other things, I think we need to put it on a maintenance plan.
Agreed.
We're probably not going to have to replace windows for another 100 years, but, I don't think roofs come with anything more than a 40-year guarantee.
Can't you guys just wear jackets?
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes the boiler heater is hot.
I don't think Catherine
Depends what office you're in, whether you're freezing cold or sweating. But
Catherine doesn't have room for a jacket in her office, so.
So, okay, we will certainly do that. That is a prudent thing to do, and we will bring that back before the next rounds of budget discussions for you.
Thank you. And then the last one on this page is the National Tool Roadway. Oh, no, sorry.
No, sorry, Leo.
That's a good idea.
So this is the roadway that we need to build to get the grant that's going to cover the street light for Christina. Anybody have any objections to
And
this?
it's also grant funded, so
Yes.
it's really costing us nothing.
Right. Do we need to discuss this? Anybody?
Well, I'm kind of curious as far as timing. So, I mean, does this not really take place until Speedway decides to, figure things out? Or is this Caterpillar related? Or, I mean, what's holding it up?
The board has already approved it, and we're waiting for LAMP to schedule it for the weather. The weather is holding it up. It's a spring project.
Okay.
Okay. I'll take this next one, the entryway signage. So we do have about $21,000 left in our culinary district donation. So we would like to use that plus additional monies. Trustee Mahoney actually requested, she's like, can we do more with these entryway signs? So we do have an inventory of the signs. We started talking to Meyer Signs based on the signage that was put on the depot. And we do think we can modify the existing entryway signs to incorporate the new logo at a pretty efficient cost, and also explore entryway signage at the, where we were talking about at River and Route 72. Or repurposing, at our last committee meeting where we discussed this, we were talking about repurposing the electronic sign in some way. So we feel like this would be enough money. So it's the 21,000 we're supposed to spend plus an additional 29,000 to basically rebrand our signage.
Would that also include, for example, on Water Street as you come into town by Rosie's from Carpentersville?
Yes,
Okay, because that sign's just beat to hell. I've
it
been
is.
thinking about that for a couple months. It just looks ratty.
A
I think
lot
that one's in our worst shape, Trustee Andrews, and that by far is our worst sign, if you will. We've had to repair it a couple of times this winter.
So basically,
You might want to think about using a material other than the cedar. It holds up, better than most other outdoor woods, or I should say wood in general, but it doesn't last long. I mean, when it comes in contact with the weather, I mean,
Yeah, a
it
lot of
gets
them
beat.
are
So we might want to think about a material that might be a little bit more longer lasting.
Okay, any other? That. All right.
And then I'm requesting, I've talked to a lot of businesses over the past year or so, and so I'm requesting 4 facade grants. I'm sorry, there's a typo there. That should say 4 $25,000 facade grants. Most recently, I talked to Chums, and they're looking at expanding into the pawn shop and the pawn shop leaving. So I would like to have, when we open this competitive grant, I'd like to have more opportunities available, because I actually think there's some interest right now. And I don't want to be in the situation where we turn somebody down for a good project. And I think anybody who's investing right now into our village, a business, is a good thing. So we do have the money available in the BDDs and the TIFs combined as discussed. So I'd like to request for facade grant.
So let me just, there would be 4, consider this almost like licenses available, but anybody that applies for these would have to be approved individually by the board.
Yeah, it's still a competitive grant process. So if we got 6 applications, we would award 4 still. Or you guys can decide to do something different. But yes, there's basically 4 available.
So it's 4 max. If 6 apply and we only like 2, we could just give 2. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this just gives us the availability
All
to
right.
do.
And these are matching grants,
Yes.
so they need to invest at least 25,000 in as well.
To get the 25, yes, to get the maximum.
Yeah, they could invest less if the board approves a project that's 20/20. That's fine too. So.
In theory, if, again, it's $100,000 total, and I'm sorry to belabor the point, but if there was 10 really good applications, the board at that time could say, hey, let's just give out 10 of 10, or, you know, somehow work the numbers. It would be, you know, something less than 25, for example, but to spread it out amongst more businesses, especially if they had less costs involved.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Up to you guys. All right.
Good idea.
Okay. Phil, street improvement program.
Yay, let's-
Street improvement. So about a year ago, Hines and Associates evaluated all village roads throughout the community and established a condition rating survey. And so last fall, as you may recall, we improved essentially 4 streets: Springcrest, King, a block of River, and then we also patched extensively Hawthorne. And as I recall, we did some additional patching on Bonnie Dundee. So this project this year, once we get a little bit closer to spring, what we'll do is take a closer look at the condition rating survey from last year and identify the worst streets going forward and attempt to or put a project together for this year, resurfacing project. And we'll also conduct some additional patching as we've done in previous years, and then also a crack filling program. But we don't currently have the streets. We have not yet identified the streets that we are proposing to improve this year. As I mentioned, we want to try to get through the winter season and then take a look at our streets as we get closer to spring weather.
And this is the area, as mentioned before, where we'd be using accumulated reserves in MFT. So this is an area where the budget is not balanced in MFT because we're using the reserves that have been accumulated over time.
Which is how much currently?
I believe it was, I'd have to go back to the memo, 182,000 will be over budget. Are you asking what's the balance in MFT right now?
Yeah. What's the reserve? This $210,000 you're talking about taking out of the reserve of the road budget, right?
Yes, that's correct. We won't need, not all of it, you know,
Well,
it's about 182. We have some. Current, we're projecting a cash balance of 392 at the beginning of the fiscal year, and at the end, after we spend some, we would still have 211.
If the report comes back from engineering saying that we have more miles of road that need to be repaired, would you bring that back to us? I mean, on one hand, it should be based on, here's what we're budgeting, let's fix as many roads that we can. But on the other hand, if we have roads that are in disrepair and we can afford to fix them this year, I would rather wait. I'd rather do that than wait another year.
It would be ideal to target all of our streets that are rated in the poor condition. So it's poor, fair, good, excellent. So yeah, we can certainly present a list of our poor streets.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to see that go to the entire board. Okay. Electronic bill pay.
Brandis?
So as we have transitioned to Civic systems for our financial software, we're trying to make sure all of our processes are integrative with Civic system. So we are proposing to transition from Illinois ePay as our electronic bill processing system, where our utility billing and some of our other permits and licensing, where they can go online to pay for their online services, where they can go to another site to pay for those things, and it'll be more integrative with our civic system. So it'll make it easier for us on the back end to not have to manually enter things as individuals make payment for their services online. It will automatically process through civic systems. And also it will make for more services to be available online for people to pay for them. We'll be able to send e-flyers to our residents who opt out of paper billing. So right now, if you opt out of the paper billing, you won't be able to receive anything that we include in our paper billing when we mail out bills. You can also receive history for your payments, which you currently can't receive that right now when you go online to pay. So it's beneficial for us on the back end, processing things, but also for the customer on the front end when they're looking to have the history of their account, especially for utility billing. So that's just our simple request. Really, it's more for integrative into our current system.
Well,
Would you say,
I like this a lot because it drives me nuts that I can't see how much I owe on the website.
would you say that this increases not just obviously customer satisfaction, but cost savings on the staff side? Would you say that this increases accuracy and cuts?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Don't we
Because we're
already have the
manually
ability-
entering everything. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, don't we already have the ability to pay our bills online? We have had for some time now. How does this
Yes, this is
improve
just
that?
a
Or
more
different?
upgraded platform for our residents to be able to. Right now, Illinois ePay is more of a baseline service to our residents. It's like the lowest of lowest platform for our residents. This is more of an upgraded process that we would, or system that we would offer to our residents. As Trustee Coonsey mentioned, if you try to pay online, you can't see your bill. You don't know what you owe unless you have the bill available to you. You have to know that information. With this system, you pull up your account number, you'll know how much you owe, you'll have your billing history available to you. And again, it'll cut down on errors on our end because we're not manually entering that information. When we get 100 payments, now we're not having to manually enter 100 payments into our system anymore.
I personally, I don't know why we aren't just farming this whole system out. I don't know why we're in-housing this stuff. There are companies out there that will handle this for us.
No.
All we have to do is just go out there and pay it and let them maintain the platform to support it. The village, this isn't
that what
really
this is?
Yeah.
Isn't that
Well,
what this is? I mean,
it's
I don't
not-
know.
But is that what it is? And we're getting rid of it? I mean, because
Currently, the state of Illinois does this for us, and now we're going to have a third party do it instead.
Yeah,
Is
we
that accurate?
typically have like the free program. When online bill pay was new, the state of Illinois set this up so municipalities could make use of it. They've never really, being the state of Illinois, they've never really put anything into it. So you basically can make a payment. Like we will tell people to make a payment for something else that's not a water bill, and we have to go find it by amount. It basically gives us very little information. Now you'll be able to pay, but it's completely integrated with our billing system so that it's talking to each other both ways. So you're accessing our system for your history, but also the payment is applied directly to the account. It's supposed to be. Right now, they make a payment. We go look at that payment and we're like, okay, $50 to this account. We got to go manually enter that. We could enter the wrong amount. We could enter the wrong account. There's a lot of room for error and there's not a lot of detail. So we're just moving from a free program to a modern program only for the benefit, not only the village, but for the benefit of the customers.
So
to meet the level of expectation that people expect nowadays. I mean, this is what you would expect.
So we're moving to a program.
Yeah, it also allows residents to pay their bill. You also will get reminders, and you can also pay your bills through Apple or Google Pay.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, it just gives more options.
So is this
Kind of moves us into the 21st century.
is this like a one-time software purchase, or is this a repeatable fee yearly that we would
There
have?
will be a annual fee because we will try to absorb some of the costs so that it won't hit the residents as much as far as the convenience fee of paying online. So I do kind of have that built into the $6,500.
Yeah, that was my next question. Would there be a convenience fee? Because that makes me crazy.
Yeah.
There would be?
But it's gonna free up a
There,
lot.
right now, there is one that we do pass on. So I just have that as the standard rate, and then we'll absorb the rest of the fees so that there aren't any additional fees on top of, I think it's like 1.5% that our residents currently pay.
So at the end of the day, we're replacing a hugely antiquated and junk system with a modern system that's going to be far better for the end user. It's going to free up our staff time. More people will probably opt out of the paper bills, which might save us more money there. I mean, it might be minimal. And it just makes our whole billing system more efficient.
That's the hope.
Okay, so did I hear correctly that in the event that someone accesses this system to pay their water bill, they're going to have to pay a 1.5% surcharge in order to use it?
That's what they're currently paying now, yes.
And if we go with this one, that 1.5% charge will not be included? They won't, the user won't have to pay it?
It will be. I mean, we can absorb the fee if you guys want us to.
Well, wait a minute. When you say absorb the fee, you're talking about paying it. How do we pay it? Where does it come from? I mean, we're going to go ahead and pay $6,500 to upgrade this software to a platform that is going to essentially do what is being done right now. It's just going to be a little more slick. Fine. If I use what's out there right now, I have to pay a 1.5% surcharge for the privilege. If we go with this new system, are you telling me that we're still going to have to pay the 1.5%, but that somehow the village will be able to absorb that from the resident?
Well, we could have done that last one too.
Well,
I'm saying we have
but
the
my point
option
is
to
that
do either or.
if the person who's paying the water bill doesn't pay the 1.5%, then his neighbor does.
Brandes, if may I believe the current percentage in the current system that we're using is a 3%. The new one is going to be 1% charge. So then it'll be cutting the fee to the resident for half.
Okay,
Here you go. Thank you.
Beautiful.
let's go to a lift station.
Thanks, Michelle.
Lift station.
You need it. Was it just undersized? Is that the problem? We spent a lot of money on that pump. Was it just an undersized pump?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
I think the issue, as indicated in the spreadsheet, the pump is undersized, particularly not so much during dry weather flow.
Yeah.
But when the river is elevated and we're in a rainy period and it's substantial rainfall, it is undersized. And so we're proposing to replace one of the pumps with a substantially larger pump.
Okay.
And then also minor piping modifications to address the additional stormwater flow that's finding its way into the sanitary sewer system.
Okay, Phil, I got a question on this one then. If we go ahead with a bigger pump, it's my understanding that what we're looking at is going to be increased cycle times on the usage of this pump. And if the water isn't there to pump it, what we're going to be doing is actually using this pump in dry mode, which is going to wear and tear on the motor that much quicker. So in the event that we don't get these heavy duty rains, or if we do get them, the motor is going to cycle more, and whether there's anything to pump off on it or not, it's going to cycle. When it does, it's going to be using the pump in a dry mode, and then therefore it's going to wear it out quicker. So, we're stuck with something that's either inadequate to move the amount of water that we currently have, or we're going to be getting a pump that's far greater than the capacity needed, and that's going to wear out quicker because it's going to cycle more. Help me out here.
Well, there are currently two pumps in the well. And so what we're looking to do, proposing to do, is to replace one. So we'll continue we'll have one of the existing pumps will remain. The smaller pump that we'll take out, that will be replaced, we will keep that on hand as a backup essentially. And so the new pump, which will be a much larger pump, will likely have the ability to operate at varying speeds and flows. And so we'll have the two pumps, and we've discussed that. That's a great question. Certainly, we've discussed that with our pump vendor. Joe Hines has been involved in our conversations, and then our wastewater operator, along with Greg and myself. And so we actually took that into consideration as we're putting a program together, if you will, a pump setup that would allow the larger pump and the smaller pump to work together during both high flows and low flow periods.
So will the system know which of the pumps to use? I mean, we can get pumps that have various phases in them. That's fine. But if we're going to use a 2-pump system, one for lesser capacity, one for greater capacity, are these 2 pumps going to know which one to go to when it's depending on the water level?
We're going to configure them so that they operate most efficiently depending upon the time of year and the flows coming into the well itself.
Okay, since we just went ahead and sunk that lift station a couple years ago, the pump that we're talking about replacing, is there any I don't know what you call it, residual value to it other than just scrap?
We're going to save that and use it as a spare, I believe Phil said.
Yes, we are going to keep that as a backup to the, yes, it will be kept.
Okay.
We're not going to dispose of it if it's still functioning, and right now, both pumps in the well are in good operating condition. So we will,
Okay, so
we'll certainly
we're not
retain
gonna
that
have to
well.
rebuild them. Okay, all right.
And the most important piece of this is not having to respond, the labor that we have to respond every time it rains.
Well,
Just to
right,
keep it dry is a huge expense and a huge burden. We've been trying to eliminate the need for responding to rain all over the village. Like
right,
we were doing that
what
at
I've
Madison and now we're doing it here, and we're trying to eliminate that.
Yeah, no, I get that, because what I've seen in years past has been with a brand new lift station, we've got an external pump with a line going down the road to the river. That's insane, because we just put a couple $1 million into a lift station that should be able to do what it's meant to do.
Yep.
It's not doing that, so.
This improvement will allow us to not have to deploy our 6-inch trailer mounted pump during periods of heavy rain. And I would assume everybody has seen this
Oh, yeah.
pump set up
Yeah.
during typically every spring, and then once or twice perhaps during the year. The pump also requires refueling daily when they're operating, and so we have to have essentially someone in 7 days a week to refuel the trailer mounted pump. So as of right now, this improvement is perhaps, in my opinion, our most significant stormwater issue in the community. And without this type of improvement, some of the homes and down in that part of the village are subject to basement backups if we don't address the pumping through this well with a trailer mounted pump or with this proposed improvement. So in fact, I typically, there's one resident who will give me a call ahead of every rainy period just to remind me that the trailer mounted pump may be needed or is needed. So.
Okay. 17 and 18 seem like just standard maintenance things. Does anybody have any questions on that? Otherwise, we could move on to the water or the water tower painting.
Do that.
Are either one of the valves, is that for, I'm just asking for the system up on Barrington? Or are these?
The valve replacement, the $10,000, that's essentially, we're setting money or budgeting, appropriating funds in the event we have a valve failure in our water distribution system. Currently, we have one valve that we're going to be repairing here soon. We have dollars in our current budget to do that. And so this is money. It happens every so often where we have a main break and we recognize that there's a valve that's not working properly. And in order to isolate a section to make a repair, we need operating valves. And if we don't have a properly operating valve, we have to extend out our shut off. And so it could impact more residents, more businesses and whatnot. So this is, again, it's just setting money aside. So when we do locate a valve that's not working properly, we have funds to replace it and or repair it accordingly.
Well, I was going to say, can we rebuild cheaper than replacing?
It can certainly happen. Yes.
Okay.
In some cases, it's better to replace, but in some instances, if we can rebuild it, if you will, and or repair it, we would certainly do that. Yes.
This is just a placeholder for the funds.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So water tower painting. Hate to spend this much money on painting anything, but it needs to get done. I'm assuming that last time I looked at costs on these, they were just depending on the size of the tanks. We would put this out for bid and just go with the lowest and best.
That's correct. Back in 2018, we had hired a consultant, and they came in and evaluated both of our elevated tanks. And they used a remotely operated vehicle to televise the wet interior. And then they also evaluated the dry interior as well as the exterior of each tower. And in this particular case, as indicated on the spreadsheet here, the exterior coated was rated to be in poor condition. The dry interior is in fair to poor condition, and then the wet interior is in poor condition. And so now is certainly the time to improve the entire water tower. It is an expensive project, but certainly the report does provide photographs of the wet interior, the dry exterior, and the exterior, excuse me, the dry interior, and then also the exterior. And there's a substantial amount of rust. And so there would also be it's also a painting project, but there's also some minor repairs to the tower itself that would be made as part of the project.
Last time we looked, I think it was like 500,000 for just the painting costs.
I want to say it was 3. Lael, do you remember when we painted? You're probably the only one around, you and I, that remember it. When Spring Hill, it was Spring Hill Ford at the time, we painted, then some of the cars got splattered.
That was a long time ago. I want to say it was over 4.
Well, that was like 10 years ago, probably, is my guess.
Yeah.
But at the time we had that painted, I was under the assumption that the life expectancy on these paint jobs was 20 to 25 years. We've gotten hardly that. So.
But that was just a touch up. That wasn't a complete repainting. That was just hitting some high spots as far as I recall.
Okay.
Well, I'd be curious as to a breakout just as to what the painting cost is as opposed to the maintenance. But I mean, obviously, this is just a budgeting number for the high side, and we put it out to bid, and it is what it is. But it needs
at this point, based on our consultant, as I recall from the report, and they're fairly lengthy reports, they are recommending a complete repainting of each. Well, this tower in particular, the other tower, I think we'll get a couple more years out of the current paint situation. And to speak to your question about overspray and onto adjacent vehicles and whatnot, I do have experience where painting a tower, there was paint that ended up on vehicles and whatnot nearby, and certainly that's an aspect of this project that has to be looked at very closely. We have obviously dealerships adjacent to this tower, and we want to make sure and ensure that the contractor securely protects their priming and painting so that there is no impact to the surrounding. We've got obviously the new CAT facility, and then the dealership. So we want to make sure that the painting project does not affect those businesses at all.
Yep.
Speaking of CAT, we could, just to keep in mind, this is kind of an aside. We talked at one time about I don't know how you phrase it, naming rights or whatever, to try and sell advertising space on those towers. There are a number of municipalities that do. The new CAT dealer might be a good option for that if they're interested.
Okay. 20, which is a vector truck for sewers.
Yeah, so a couple of months back, the village of Carpentersville contacted me, indicating that they have purchased a new vehicle, a new Vector unit, which is essentially it's a large machine that is used for a number of reasons, purposes for cleaning storm sewers, sanitary sewers, assisting on water main breaks. In fact, the water main break that I mentioned this afternoon, the contractor used their Vector to excavate around the main. We had a 6-inch main that was leaking. And these can be used in more delicate situations. If we've got gas lines, other water lines, other utility communications infrastructure, electrical infrastructure. So this type of unit can be used for a number of different purposes. And so Carpentersville, in replacing their current unit, contacted us and asked if we would have an interest in purchasing their used Vector unit. The price that they were talking, they had proposed a $40,000 purchase price to their unit. Greg, myself, and some of our staff did inspect their used unit. It appears to be in very good operating condition. It's a 2001 unit. So they've had it approximately 20 years. Their new machine is close to $500,000. And the unit that they're looking to, that they have approached us with would be, again, as I mentioned, used for a number of different uses. And I did a little internet research on Vector units. I didn't see any in our immediate area, but as I recall, I saw one comparable to the one that Carpentersville is looking to sell. And I thought, as I recall, I saw a list price, a used price of around $60,000 for that unit. So I did ask Carpentersville if they would consider if there was any negotiating wiggle room, if you will, on the $40,000 price. And they have not gotten back to me on that. But as far as we know, the only issue, so to speak, is there's a slight leak in the steering gearbox of the unit. And that repair is essentially approximately $2,000. But the unit, Carpentersville has communicated to us that they have, throughout its life, has been stored indoors. It's been maintained both in-house and then also Standard Equipment, which is a company that uses, that sells and services these types of Vector units as well as street sweepers and whatnot. So it appears to have been maintained well through the years. And it's an opportunity, we feel, to have a unit like this in-house, albeit 20 years old. It would be an asset to our operations. There's also a jetting system on the front end of it. We do have a trailer-mounted jetter, but certainly having a truck-mounted jetting system would allow us to clean our sewers, sanitary and storm, jet our sewers, and then also assist on main breaks and other operations here in Public Works. And Greg, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add. Please feel free to jump in.
So Phil, is the Vector a actual the same kind of vehicle, big truck that Lake Julian had that we used on Howard for the repairs that we just made recently?
Yes, I
It's like
believe so.
a hydro jet where they're shooting water into and then extracting the mud to get at to dig the hole, basically.
Yep.
It's a really cool vehicle. I understand. I mean, all I would suggest is that we try and do some sort of history to compare the use of what the village has contracted out for that type of vehicle and compare it to what it's going to cost us to maintain. So
ideally, this is a necessary piece of equipment. So what we've done in the past is rent it or hire somebody. And this is an absolute, basically we have to clean our sewers. And that's just part of the job. Your sewers are useless if they're clogged. We also have a camera system, so you have to clean them before you run the camera. So the uses are endless. We don't have that ability. So we've limited ourselves and occasionally rent something. But this is something we really need all the time. And it's like the bargain of the year. We actually, in one of my past villages, we bought a used Vector for $100,000. And just having it, it really changed our operations. Being able to go ahead and clean those storm sewers all of the time, or somebody's having an issue and you can clean it out, send a camera down and check out what the issue is. It's just really, I can't explain how important this machine would be to the village. We would bring it back for more discussion because we want to make sure we feel confident that it's in good condition and good shape. So this would come to the board, but we want to make sure we can get it in the budget if you agree, because it's a deal of a lifetime. $35,000 is a bargain.
From 25 and they throw in a free set of floor mats.
Formats are nice.
Let's leave this in for now, and then you can bring us more details on this, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
Just one other question. The jetting, is that something that can be used on the culverts as well?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. For the areas in the village that don't have sewers.
Now, the jetting capability, there's a number of operations that the jetting component of this vehicle. We do have a trailer mounted jetter that we use fairly often. And this would certainly provide an additional jetting option to us and for us.
Thanks.
All right. Do we really need to discuss 21 and 22? One is residential water meters that will allow them to be radio read, and the other one is repair of or replacement of pumps and waters.
No.
Okay. All right, page 2.
Okay. I just want to go, these are the deferred items. So why don't I take it, Lil, just so I can be efficient here. We're all getting tired, and I'll go quickly. So this is the cost to backfill. Oh no, the first one is the police pension contribution. So in the memo, I got into the whole police pension contribution detail. We covered this in November, so I don't know, I need to rehash it. But basically, because the funds are consolidated, we are only budgeting the minimum required contribution by the Department of Insurance. We are not budgeting the recommended amount by the independent actuary hired by the pension fund. So the difference is $266,000. We feel that the consolidation of the pension funds by the state of Illinois, when that occurs, will significantly change our returns, which will totally change our position. So we don't feel like, at this point, this is contrary to what we talked about before. We don't feel that it's actually a good investment to take our funds now and dump it into the pension fund because of the pending consolidation. We certainly could do that. As I said, there's $45,000 a surplus the budget's showing in the general fund right now. You could use 45,000 and kick in 45,000 more. You could use some reserves and kick in more, but that's the idea here, to budget the minimum required contribution.
Can I ask the money that we put in reserves, are we putting those in interest-bearing accounts? Those monies?
Brandis, you'll have to speak of this. We actually don't have CDs yet. That would be like our next step, but we've never quite gotten to that point. We do earn interest, but we don't earn a lot of interest. I think we are, Trustee Coonsey, to the point where we can start looking at our reserves, because
the only reason I'm asking is because if we put this $266,000 in the police pension, that is going into an interest-bearing account.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's actually, it's a good investment, and usually I recommend it. I'm just, with this consolidation, we're going to earn a lot more with this consolidation.
Theoretically.
Finally meet our 7, 8. Theoretically.
Yes.
Because we're limited on what we can invest. Because of the size of our pension fund, we have a lot of limits. So our returns are like 4% when they should be 7, 8, or 9%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it still would earn money. It's really your choice. Yeah.
Can I ask if this consolidation of the pension funds for the state it changes at all the directive that the state sent everybody a couple years ago, suggesting that we had to have the fund 90% funded by the year 2040? Because we took a position at that time to go ahead and try and get to 100% funded by 2036, which is significantly more aggressive. But if the state is now changing this, and if it's this consolidated approach and it lets people maybe vary how much they put in, or maybe even borrow against it, who knows, then I would suggest that we probably cut back a bit on that aggressive approach to being 100% funded, because there's no downside to it anymore. Not, if I'm wrong, help me out.
Legislation hasn't been passed, but the discussions that I've heard so far is actually to extend it out further. Probably 90%.
That's because nobody's got any money to put into it. No one was going to make 2040.
Yeah.
So
that
yeah,
would
that's
be
not
our
a surprise.
option. We would still have local control.
Yeah.
So we could still change we can use whatever assumptions we want. But the state is going to probably give us the ability to stretch it out even further. I don't agree with it, but nobody listens to me when I say that.
You don't agree with what? Stretching it out?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that the majority of the municipalities in the state of Illinois is not in anywhere near as good a condition as East Dundee, which, based on that continually abating that PTEL amount for property taxes, put us in an even tougher spot for the few years that were in the prior boards. But as I say, if the state isn't going to smack us around by the year 2040, that
there is a God.
Frozen.
God forbid I ever freeze like that.
we can ease up on the amount
comes
that
back.
we're putting.
There it is.
There he is.
2040 is 18 years from now. Let's not worry about that tonight. Move on.
Well,
So
true enough, but I mean, what we're doing right now is we're funding it to $600,000 or $700,000 a year.
Yeah, well, we haven't heard
and that's a pretty tight requirement on a town this size. My thought is that if the state is not going to compel villages to adhere to that aggressive schedule, then I think we can act and react accordingly. We might. I'm saying we might get a little bit more elbow room.
So the other items on here are replacing some overhead lines from the Village Hall to police station and the generator. So that we didn't see that as a priority. Last year I put in for part-time admin because of the economic development load. Really, I needed to rebalance my priorities. But we cut the events, so we managed without the part-time person. So in theory, that would be nice. Again, but I did not ask for it in the, it's deferred. It's not in the budget. Phil asked for a couple of pickup trucks, and I'm sorry, I told Phil no. One of them, he does have not a very good functioning vehicle for himself. If you have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. It's a black sedan, an old police car. It's not a functional vehicle for a public works director, but what happened was Jim Kelly was serving in both roles. When we decided to split that role into two, we gave Chris the truck. And Phil has been driving, it's a sedan, a 2011 Crown Victoria. So, and he has another pickup truck replacement. Phil, you're okay waiting. Phil's a good sport about vehicles, but if you want to say anything about.
No, you covered it.
Yeah, Phil's a good sport. He knows he got his dump truck last year, so he remembers that, and he's excited about the water tower. But if you wanted to throw Phil a new vehicle, I'm sure he'd appreciate that.
You could take
one of the bikes of the police department.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Jeff on board.
Yeah.
Or an Uber.
Yeah, a bike would work. Motorized bike.
E-bike. I would vote yes on Phil's 20,000 for his car. Just saying, I would do that.
Well, the first three items were $25,000 worth of what I view as discretionary spending. We can earmark those for this. At least that's a possibility. Might consider.
Discretionary.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay.
And then the Fox River, we really want to do something with the Fox River. We've applied for a couple of grants for planning because we don't really want to go at it without a plan. And we haven't gotten them, unfortunately, but we tried. So there is some budget in, there was a request by Phil to really do something with it, get the sidewalk in, picnic tables, clear out trees. make it usable. It's part of our strategic plan and what we want to see, but we just felt like there were higher priorities at this time. And then painting of the wastewater treatment plant was something that we would like to see done, but it's okay if we wait till next year. The other items below are items that were not requested in this budget, but are still out there. They were requested in other budgets, like the backfill of the officers, which only would be requested if there was a need, which we think will be okay. The body cameras, which is still out there, but we have till 2025, and we feel strongly that we should wait and see. This is a wait and see to determine whether the legislation will change on the body cameras. Typically, you do not jump on these mandates right away because something can change. And technology with body cameras will improve also. But that is something we're supposed to do by 2025. So we've got it on the list.
But we've already run video in squads, and we also have audio on the police, on the bodies, right?
Yeah. Well, we do have the dash cam. Yeah, we do have the dash cam, and that's about basically all we have. So the new law, the new police reform law tells us we must have body cameras by 2025.
Well,
I have a strong suspicion, there's already trailer bills being filed though, and I have a strong suspicion that some of those requirements will change. So it makes sense to wait for that before we rush to implement.
Can I ask a question about line number 15? 2 full-time officers to backfill where the 2 officers are going to be promoted to sergeants?
These are items that haven't been budgeted, Jeff. These are not.
No, I realize that.
Okay.
I'm just surprised that was even asked for, to be honest with you. I don't understand how.
It's not being asked for. It's just the purpose of here is alerting you of the need. So we're not asking for it. We don't think it's financially viable. But according to the police department, they ideally, in an ideal world, would like to backfill the sergeants, but they're not asking for it. So in the past, it was asked for Saturday and Sunday entertainment or some sort of a budget for a Saturday and Sunday event. So we kept that running because we know that constantly comes up. The depot market is kind of on its last legs. Lael and I met with Stefan and Brad, and so it's out there. So it's something we don't want to forget about. If the depot market goes away, do we want to put something on Saturday or Sunday to bring people in town? And then there's the parking lot for the caboose. We put this on hold because the parking lot needs a lot of upgrades. It needs lighting. It needs a lot of improvements. We got a smoker in the middle of it. And but if it's going to be redeveloped at some point, we're not recommending that we put a lot of investment in it. And so that's the only reason why this is kind of on a back burner. I mean, I think it's a priority to light that lot, but we're just not sure we should make that investment at this time if for some reason something was going to happen in the future. We also don't own the lot. We lease it from Dolores. So how much money do we really want to put in it? We're not sure. Paving the police station parking lot. There's a small lot next to the police station that's gravel. They sometimes park like an extra car there. It's more of a beautification item. It would serve the police officers, obviously, but again, not a strong priority unless it's the board's priority. Staff doesn't feel like it's critical. Of course, we've wanted to continue burying the overhead wires in the downtown, and that the only reason it's not in the budget is because it's so expensive. But if the board wants to do it, we're definitely supportive of it. It's a hard item to fund because of the price tag. But could you certainly do this and not do something else or use the reserves? Sure. We covered the planning for the river walk, and then Phil, I'll just go real quickly. There's definitely a need for a secondary water main that serves the flats. So when the water main goes out, when there was a water main break, we have to take a lot of customers out. So that's a need that's not going to go away. We have like tried to apply for grants and like submitted it for the capital grant at the state of Illinois. But it's a need that's out there. It's going to be out there for a while. It's kind of it's just not good that they don't have a secondary line because it's a lot of homes, right, Phil?
Correct.
Okay. And so every time this breaks, we have to basically take people out of service. And then the replacement of the Went Street sanitary sewer main. Phil, can you speak about that, or is that more of a Joe
No,
Hines
so-
who's been out there for a while?
Went Street has the sanitary sewer has kind of a flat area with a little bit of a belly, if you will. And so there's, in talking with Joe Hines and Public Works staff, there would be a desire at some point down the road to replace that section of sanitary sewer.
That swale, does that go would that need to be replaced from King all the way to Howard? Is that the idea? Or would that go all the way back up to Oak and down King a ways? Because I know we talked about at one point, that whole line being replaced from Howard and Went all the way up to King.
That is the section. I believe it's just a King, but I would have to follow up and confirm. It's my understanding. It's Greg. Do you recall? Is that from Howard to King?
I believe so. I don't recall 100%, but I believe it was just that section.
But okay.
Well, we currently have that on a list where we jet that line periodically. We call it maintenance jetting. So we do jet that a sanitary sewer line periodically, just to ensure that there's proper flow through there because it's relatively flat.
Since and Joe Hines, I know he understands the layout of this as well, that if there was a swale or a belly in that line, have we ever, I mean, are we scoping that on a regular basis to find out what sort of stress it's under? I mean, I'd hate to see that thing fail right at the middle, because then we're digging up the whole road anyway, you know.
Don't know if it's been evaluated to that level. I don't have an answer to. I can certainly find out. But again, at this point, it's on a radar, but it's not reached a level of urgency where we need to budget for its replacement at this present time.
Okay, and our last item is to start 408 Barrington, start that process of kind of removing and turning it so that we could use it for redevelopment, but we also don't see that as a high priority right now.
Jennifer, which one is this? Is it
408 Barrington, the old
The old water plant.
yes.
Old water plant.
House that has the big cistern in the back of it?
Yes.
Okay.
The old
So that-
underground storage, yeah.
That would start the work of removing everything from the basement. But we do feel that this is something maybe we can negotiate in a redevelopment agreement, or, you know, it's not something we feel like we need to tackle right now unless the board wanted to tackle it.
Okay.
Okay.
The only other question I would have is how far are we on those centrifuges? That's a big money item right there. That's half of what's been not budgeted, but that's kind of an essential item, or it will become so.
It is. If as you may recall, I think it was approximately 2 years ago, we rebuilt one of the centrifuges to the tune of approximately $30,000. And it, knock on wood, it and the other centrifuges are both currently working well and producing a high quality biosolids product. But they are aging like other components of the wastewater treatment plant. And so we've targeted their eventual replacement, but whether we replace it with centrifuges in kind, or if we look at another option for generating sludge, that's still yet to be ultimately determined.
Well, I just wonder if this is something that instead of just fully deferring, if we should be setting something aside for down the road so we're not paying
reserves,
full dollar amount when it actually needs to be happening.
Right. right.
It's in our capital plan, isn't it, Phil?
I believe it is, yes. I'd have to take a quick peek here.
So essentially, we are reserving.
Yes, it is in the 5-year plan.
Okay.
So Phil, not to belabor it or anything, but did you mention that there was an alternative for producing sludge apart from this centrifuge system?
It would be in place of, so we would replace, I'm trying to find the, to answer your question. There are other options. And I would want to, before I offer any of those here, I'd want to do a little research and get a better understanding of exactly what those options are. I don't off the top of my head, I can't provide you with any specific examples of systems. I mean, one option is just to take our liquid sludge and dispose of that, but that tends to be a little more expensive compared to generating a solid product that's land applied.
They used to take it off our hands for nothing. No.
Yeah, currently our sludge disposal process is, in my mind, isn't terribly expensive, which is a good thing. You know, as I mentioned, the disposal of liquid sludge would substantially be substantially more expensive. But
Okay. Is everybody understand the budgeted projects and the deferred projects?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We have a couple more items in the memo I want to go through quickly. I know we're probably all tired.
Yes.
So we went over the page 10. We went over the police pension contribution, and there's an explanation if you need any further information on that. But I did summarize it. Then following at the bottom of page 10, we talk about the events. Sorry, Brad, I'm gonna just buzz through this. I asked him to present, but we're presenting the same schedule. And we've outlined some of the protocols we're gonna put in place. And we had a community events committee meeting about it. And the committee had a lot of discussion. At the end of the day, they said, close some extra streets, spread people out, and we're good to go. So does anybody have any thoughts about proceeding with our event schedule?
I actually have a request to add an event. I will be organizing it and getting volunteers, but the Friends of the Fox River are having their annual Clean Up the Fox River Day on September 18th. I will be coming to whoever I need to get permits from for that. And also, I did this last year with Carpentersville, and their public works department came and picked up the garbage that we collected and also provided us with some garbage picker-uppers. So Phil, if you have those, I will be coming to you as well.
sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, we've assisted with that with Gary Swick, I think, before in the past. So good to go. We have plenty of funds in the budget to take care of your garbage picker-uppers and
Thank you.
and market it for you. Thank you for.
I will mark it myself. You won't have to pay for any of that, but
Well, we'll help you.
we will be competing with West Dundee's Heritage Fest, but what are you gonna do?
I'll be at your event.
What could be more fun than picking up trash on the side of the road
Well, on the side of the river, actually, as it
or
were.
side of the river?
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about altering the event schedule from normal? Good, we're excited, very excited. Okay, and this is one of the trickier, I know, more sensitive topics. So we talked about the promotion of the sergeant, so I'm not going to belabor that again. We're in a unique situation, and we put ourselves here intentionally, where we've lined up the police contract and the public works contract to end at the same time. As happens often, both unions delay the start of negotiations. Despite what we want, we can't get them to the table. So their contract expires April 30th, 2021. So typically any increases are handled through a retro pay, and that's very common. Oftentimes I will come and I will say to the non-union, you have to sit and wait. You know, that's always been my strategy. You have to sit and wait until the union is done. But in East Dundee, we actually have very few union or non-union employees. So my recommendation here is to budget for a cost of living adjustment to give to the non-union employees. I don't think it hurts our bargaining position. I actually think it just helps out our non-union employees at this time. The reason why I don't think it hurts our bargaining position is the non-union increases are far less than the union increases just by the nature. And there's little we can do about that because they have all of these comps, and every union every city that's doing something is actually tying our hands when it comes to collective bargaining agreements and negotiations. So my proposal here is to do what we've done in the past, give the 3% to the non-union as a cost of living adjustment, and then the merit increases of 3% to the department head team and 1% to other positions. Now, keep in mind, there is a compensation plan within your packet. Many of the employees are at top of range anyway. I didn't alter the top of range, so many of the employees are not getting this merit increase. So it's really in theory, and they understand that. They understand that process. So the merit increase over time just helps them move through the range and incentivize them. But when they get to the top of range, they get to the top of the range. So that is what I'm asking. I understand if the board thinks that it is imprudent to make those increases at this time, but that's what I'm requesting for non-union employees.
So Jennifer, we actually asked the unions to sit down and start discussions, and they've said no.
Yeah, they stall. They're very good at it. They actually like the retro pay, Scott. And I think they were afraid of COVID, negotiating during COVID.
I mean, at what point, I guess it's a gray line between, playing hardball and committing an unfair labor practice per the national labor laws. But are we opening ourselves to any kind of exposure by virtue of giving the non-union employees benefits? I would think no, because we've already asked the other side, the unions to begin negotiations. They refused.
Yes, and a lot of it, when you negotiate, sure, they can point to the non-union and say, this is what you gave the non-union. But what happens usually at the end of the day in negotiations, you're looking at your comps. Mm-hmm. You're looking at your other towns. So I don't think it significantly hurts our position. We know we're going to end up in a certain ballpark anyway. That's where we end up historically. And so I don't think it hurts us. They could try to say that, yes. But it's very typical for these negotiations to start late for the police union here in East Dundee. Now, Public Works is usually starts sooner, but our last negotiations, we settled in one meeting in like 2 hours. So even if we start late, we may settle Public Works quickly.
Okay.
So is it correct to say that there's a situation where we could end up giving a 3% cost of living adjustment and a merit increase on top of that?
Yes, that's what we've been doing for the last several years.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't understand that, because nowhere in the private sector do you get that. I mean, we can sit down and have a discussion about comp, but I don't understand where it's written that we have to provide any more than what you'd normally expect to get in the public sector. I mean, we're talking about a 3% increase for cost of living on top of what may be a 3 or 4% comp for just merit. In addition to which, we've got this silly notion of longevity bonuses going through. And, I know people who are getting promoted at the company that I work for, which is a Fortune 100 company, for a 4% increase. All I can say is that throughout my entire career, I went into the wrong sector. It should have been public, I'm really,
Or you should have been better at your job and got merit increases.
Well, that's not the point, Scott. It wasn't an issue of whether or not you were good enough. It was an issue of what management was willing to pay. And what we don't do in this town or many others is that we don't apply those same sort of economic restrictions or guidelines. So what we're doing is that just because other towns decide to give their people a 3% COLA and a merit increase, East Dundee has to file a suit.
I will issue with the point that no corporation does this, because I've worked for plenty of corporations that do this. I've gotten
Okay.
stock options, I've gotten bonuses, I've gotten retention bonuses. Here's a check for not quitting the company this year.
Yeah, right. Well, that's fine because that's a public, that's a private organization and they can do with their money what they want. We're not that.
Jeff, I'm
We're
not
a public entity here.
I'm
And so
not
whatever
arguing
we,
the point, I just started by saying that I will disagree with you that the fact is that you're saying that no corporations do this.
no corporations do it now, Lael. You need to be out there and take a look at what's going on from a comp standpoint. I mean, you'd be surprised at what you don't get in the private sector. And the 9 to 5, I worked for Allstate, plenty of money in that company. And if you were getting 2% as a merit increase in any given year, you were either on somebody's list or you had pictures of
If I wasn't getting that, I'd go to a different company.
That's it.
Well, that's fine. I
That's
have
the
the ability
companies
to
that I've
do
worked
that.
with.
What I'm
But
saying is though,
this is not going to be a drag out ball on this. We understand your opinion. I'm just
Okay.
stating the obvious, which is that there are companies that do this all over the place.
yeah, but what I'm saying is that we don't necessarily have to be one of them because we don't apply these kind of.
I'm not arguing.
We
Okay,
don't apply
so
these kind of criteria.
I guess I'll just chime in and say, we've been doing these increases and we're sitting here going over a budget in which we have significantly reduced our debt and significantly increased our cash reserves over the course of the last 4 years with these increases because we have a great staff.
Yes.
And the option for people that don't get raises is they go somewhere else.
Right.
Jeff, I've been in the private workforce too, my entire career. And what happens when people don't get raises? They leave. If you got good people, yes, they do, Jeff. I did.
No,
And
they
a lot of
don't.
people I know did. Well, if you were to find staying and making the same money forever, that's fine. But most people aren't, especially if they got skill sets that are desired by somebody else. And part of that is actually keeping good personnel. And, to some degree, keeping good personnel happy and motivated so they don't think about going somewhere else. I mean, it's, again,
We need to move on from this issue here. I understand it's decisive and I understand that there are disagreements on this, but we're not going to solve their disagreements on this tonight. So Jennifer?
And then there's 2 simple items. I just want to touch base on them because I feel like we should always. We've obviously adopted a water and sewer rate schedule till 2033. So I just wanted to let you know that that is in there. It's about a $5.54 increase on the average bill. And remember, there's set increases every year. So that's part of the adopted schedule. Also, our passing on the refuse fees did still include the sunset ordinance. So we would bring that ordinance back to continue passing that on. We did try to get those senior discounts in. We were successful in doing that and getting a senior cart with additional senior discounts, but that I would have to bring. So bottom of the page is the most important. I need some consensus from you on these 5 items that I have listed. Some are, hopefully we can get there. And by consensus, I guess it means, majority or whatever President Miller decides, but the proposed budget and the projects, the cash balance policy and the assignment of reserves to capital projects, the staffing level with the sergeants and the increases and the water and sewer rates and the refuse fees.
Are we keeping the leaf collection program in this budget?
Yes.
The what program?
Leaf collection, sir.
Oh.
Yes. So is there anything in the budget that you've seen that you think should be pulled? Or is there anything that you want to add to the budget that wasn't included?
I would like to get together with you, Jennifer, offline and make a couple of suggestions. But so before we ink this deal at all, I'm going to review it a little further.
Yeah. It won't be, it's not being approved right now, but we do need a budget to present to the public at the public hearing.
Do we need that tonight?
So you can certainly send me your comments. And I'll make sure, Lael gets them and the board. Well, we have to be careful of the Open Meetings Act. That's why we're in a meeting, but
Yeah.
What about the rest of the board members?
Uh, I guess I would reiterate that I would add Phil's truck in personally. If anybody else would like to do that, maybe speak up now.
I'm okay with that. And also to Lael's point earlier, I mean, if there's some improvements that can be made to Village Hall where it actually makes sense to do, you know, all the windows at once instead of doing it piecemeal and doing some other things, I'd be okay with increasing the budget there as well.
Well, I mean, if we're gonna try and put together something now, I'm just gonna go right out there and say, I think spending $5,000 on bicycles and $10,000 on a training session for information that we already possess, and whatever the other item was, it was $25,000 worth of items to the police department, and yet we're going to go ahead and continue to charge for garbage, and we're going to go ahead and hand out cost of living raises on top of merit increases. You know, there's an optics here that has to be considered, and it really sends a bad message. So if you want to see a program continue at the expense of the other, then you have to eliminate the other. It just, as it sits, if you need a consensus, I'm not part of it.
Okay, we need to let some of the other board members speak at this point.
I'm good with what was presented.
Kathleen?
I'm good with what was presented. I also think the truck for 20 grand is something that I would agree to adding in that wasn't originally in there. I also agree with coming back with a bigger plan on the village hall.
Andreessen?
I'm in favor of what was presented, other than, like I said, you know, if there's additional improvements that we can make to Village Hall, I would be in favor of that as well.
Scott Kunze, are you good?
Just the comment that I've already made, but yes.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. The cash balance policy. Does anybody have any objections to the cash balance policy?
No objection.
Okay. The sergeants and the staffing increases for non-union.
And the sergeants was the $9,000 one, correct?
That's correct. Any objections? I mean, Trustee Lynham, I know you objected.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. The water and sewer rate increase. Refuse fees.
Yeah, I'm
with the senior citizen discount.
And what is that total that we collect for those $20 fees? I don't remember.
It's about, hold on, I gotta pull the budget. Bear with me.
260 gallon. A month.
Our revenue stream is about 289,000.
That we collect for the refuse, in additional to, yeah.
Yes.
Wait, so you said the revenue contract is 289,000?
The what we collect from the residents is budgeted at 289,000.
And what is it we pay out to Flood Brothers?
We pay out pretty much the same. It's a wash, but we did add the LEAF program, which we're paying for directly. And we have some other refuse costs that are built into the budget that are not related to the residents necessarily.
Well, I do think that, you know, when we added this $20 fee, I feel like it was under the assumption that it wouldn't be forever. And I understand that at whatever point we stop, we're going to be biting into a $280,000 a year bill. But, you know, I feel like it's something we need to at least think about because, you know, like I said, I don't think that the idea of it at the time it happened was that it was going to last forever.
We also, I think, extended that sunset idea when, just for a little history for those who aren't aware, when we first adopted as a village the home rule sales or the home rule status, it was with the understanding that from the home rule sales tax fund, monies were going to come to pay for the refuse bill. So in other words, prior to home, We were taking the money and we were subsidizing the general fund, or we were taking the money out of the general fund, I should say, to pay for the refuge costs. So we weren't really saving any money or anything. It wasn't, the village was paying for it without going to the resident for a check. We get into a bit of a trouble. So we go to the resident, we say, now we have to put this $20 a month bill on you guys. You need to write us an extra check for it. That goes against the agreement that the village gave the board at the time for the home rule sales status, or, you know, the home rule status. However, there are a number of items that I'm seeing that can be argued that really, as I say, look bad for the village. When we're going to go ahead and spend monies on this and on that, which I view as 100% discretionary, and keep in place that refuse charge, it poses a very difficult explanation for the board members. And I, for one, don't want to have to explain that to my neighbors. You know, why it is we're going to go ahead and spend $5,000 on bicycles when we're going to continue to charge you for garbage removal. You know, how do I explain that?
Better policing.
There you go. And then we're going to go ahead and add 2 new cops to replace the sergeants that we're going to bump up.
No, we're not doing that.
That's
You know,
not happening.
And the pension that goes along with it.
That's not part of the budget, Jeff.
No, it wasn't, but it's going to be, Scott. That's my point. You see all these budget items that are not being budgeted now. Believe me, man, these things are in the breach, and they're going to come forward in another time.
Jeff, at
Just
some
because
point
we're
you
not
have to
talking
realize
about
that
it today
every dollar
doesn't mean
spent
we
is not a
won't
bad
talk about
dollar.
it tomorrow.
So one thought is, you know, we're right.
Good spending.
We're right now, we're collecting $20. Maybe we go into a plan, 4-year plan, reduce it $5 every year. We're increasing our revenue from the sales tax every year. Maybe we think about that at least.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
It is
So
too.
similar to what the increase was for the water and the sewer, put in kind of a calendar plan on reducing it
Yeah.
for the resident, but putting it into our general fund.
Good idea. Let's see if we can come up with something on that.
But even now, aren't we like massively less expensive than any other community?
Yeah.
Yes.
Our senior discount is pretty good. The only one who, so West Dundee did what we did, which originally they included in their property taxes. So you're still paying for it. And then Carpentersville, it must be property tax funded, and then you pay like $6 a year or whatever the fee is now. But so almost everybody pays for garbage. And so we've been trying to get it down to reasonable, at least for seniors, but we can put a plan in place to figure out how to reduce it more. I just have to know if it's going to have an impact on this budget, or would this be a plan for the next budget?
Well,
because it does tap into, it's part of our general fund. So in theory, you could use the 45,000 and try to roll that in if you'd like. That's available, or more is available in the reserves. But I wouldn't recommend going into reserves to subsidize refuse fees.
Agree.
I don't think that's a wise move, because that's kind of put us in the problem in the first place. I mean, 3 years you're at $1 million, right?
I mean, wouldn't this be something to be more appropriate? Because again, the budget, I mean, has substantially been created. Isn't it something better that would be thought out, rather than kind of like just rushing into something right now? Have a plan to like start discussing what the phase out would be, beginning with the budget for 2022. Because that way it could be more thought could be given to it. It's not going to be rushed. It's not going to negatively impact this budget, which is substantially created. And then that way you could do next year's budget with this knowledge in mind.
Sure.
Would be my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that. Just doing the quick math of the 280,000, if we went down to $15, we're talking $70,000. We'd have to add to this budget. So I don't know. Just a thought.
And again, the board might think that doing 20% a year for over 5 years might make more sense. Again, it's I'm not saying that shouldn't be done. I think it's a great idea, but I think now is kind of the wrong time to try to implement something
Well, we're talking about this budget right now, so I mean,
What
seems
do-
like it's,
What do our water and sewer go up every year? Is it 3 point something?
A lot.
Yeah, it's an average about 3.5% or so.
Yeah, so I mean, if we calculate it out using that number, say we go down 3.5%.
3.5% on the $20.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's something we can do, and then we can say we've locked your bill, basically. We've frozen your bill. We've frozen increases. So it's not bad from a communication standpoint.
Mhm.
So you're
I think,
offsetting a water increase with lesser garbage collection fees.
yeah, we can certainly look at that. I do agree with Trustee Andreessen. I think it needs a lot of review. And then a good plan, and we can certainly present it. You know, and maybe we can even get it in partway in this fiscal year. Maybe we don't have to wait. As long as the board doesn't want to wait, we don't have to wait. We can amend our budget.
okay,
Okay.
good.
I think I have all the direction that we need. So we do have a public hearing on April 19th. Is everybody feel comfortable proceeding with a public hearing on the 19th? Or is there, with the additional information on the Village Hall improvements, and also, I guess, including Phil's truck? Does everybody feel good about moving forward with that? I get a thumbs up from Dan. Yes.
I'm
yes,
good.
Yes.
When is the election?
April 6th, right?
When does the budget have to be submitted? May 1st?
April 30th, it has to
April
be
30th.
approved by.
Okay, so we have public comment on non-agenda items. Does anybody here like to address this board this evening on any item? Seeing none, we have no executive session. I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Who's the second? Okay,
Trustee Lineham,
Yes.
trustee Sullivan,
Yes.
trustee Wood left at 6:30. Trustee Mahoney,
Yes.
trustee Andreessen,
Yes.
trustee Coonsey,
Okay. Yes.
and President Miller.
yes. All right, folks. And Jennifer, thanks so much for you and staff putting all this together. I know how much work goes into it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks thanks Trish and Sarah for hanging in there for the evening. This is probably one of the most important things that we do. So,
Thank you.
yep. So we'll work with you
Thank
guys. All right. Good night, folks. We'll see you later.
Have a good night, everybody.
Right.
Night.
Thanks.
All right.